The air in the Aleppo warehouse tasted of rust, stale diesel, and the metallic tang of blood. Outside, the Syrian sun beat down on the corrugated metal roof, turning the interior into a suffocating oven. But the heat wasn't what was making Commander Ethan Donovan's breath come in ragged, wet gasps. It was the two broken ribs and the punctured lung inflicted by the man standing over him. Colonel Richard Vance looked down at his former friend with a cold, detached curiosity, as if he were observing a laboratory specimen rather than a brother-in-arms he had served beside for a decade. Vance's polished combat boots slammed into Ethan's side one final time, a sickening thud that sent a fresh spray of crimson across the dirt-streaked concrete floor. Ethan tried to speak, his fingers clawing at the grit, but Vance reached down and grabbed a handful of his hair, jerking his head back with brutal force. "Your daughter," Vance hissed, his voice a jagged whisper that cut through the distant sound of mortar fire. He pressed the warm barrel of his suppressed sidearm against Ethan's temple. "That little blonde girl you showed me pictures of back at the green ramp. The one who draws those messy pictures of mountains. She'll never know her daddy died begging for his life in a hole in the desert. She'll grow up thinking you were just another casualty of a war that didn't matter." Ethan's eyes, though clouded with pain and the onset of shock, blazed with a defiance that no amount of torture could extinguish. He swallowed the blood in his mouth and choked out a final, raspy prophecy. "She'll find you, Richard. She won't just remember me. She'll hunt you down like the traitor you are. She's my daughter, and I taught her everything." Vance let out a short, hollow laugh, a sound devoid of any humanity, and pulled the trigger. The muffled crack of the gunshot echoed briefly against the warehouse walls before being swallowed by the vast, indifferent silence of the desert. Ethan Donovan collapsed, the light fading from his eyes, and Vance walked away toward a waiting extraction team, smiling at the thought of the millions waiting for him in offshore accounts. He never imagined that 12 years of a father's relentless training had just created his own executioner. 12 years later, at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, the morning humidity was already thick enough to wear. The constant percussion of gunfire from the various ranges created a rhythmic heartbeat for the base, a sound that signaled the honing of the world's most elite warriors. Suddenly, the heavy steel doors of the main indoor range swung open with a metallic screech that cut through the noise like a knife. Every head on the firing line turned. In the doorway stood a woman who looked entirely out of place, yet strangely at home. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight, practical knot, and fine gray dust coated her rugged hiking boots. She wore a faded gray hoodie and worn jeans, carrying an old, scarred rifle case over her shoulder with an ease that suggested it was an extension of her own body. Her eyes, the color of a winter storm over the Bitterroot Mountains, scanned the room with a level of calm that made even the most seasoned operators feel an instinctive prickle of unease. Senior Chief Logan Reeves set his clipboard down on a wooden bench and began walking toward her. Logan had spent 15 years forging seals in the fires of Hell Week and beyond. He'd seen every type of recruit imaginable: the cocky athletes, the legacy kids trying to live up to a name, the quiet professionals from the heartland. But a civilian woman walking onto a restricted range with that kind of posture was something entirely new. "Ma'am, I think you might have gotten turned around," Logan said, his voice projecting easily over the remaining gunfire. A few operators at the far end of the line stopped shooting, leaning back to watch the encounter. Some of them exchanged amused glances. "The visitor center is back by the main gate, about 2 miles down the road. You can't be in here." The woman didn't stop. She kept walking with a measured, predatory gait until she was mere feet from the firing line. Logan stepped directly into her path, his large frame blocking her way. "Ma'am, this is a restricted training facility. This isn't a tour. You need to turn around and leave now, or I'll have security escort you out." She stopped exactly 3 feet from him, meeting his gaze without the slightest flicker of intimidation. "My name is Clare Donovan," she said, her voice low and steady. "Commander Ethan Donovan was my father." The name hit the room like a physical blow. The laughter and the muffled conversations died instantly. Logan felt a cold weight settle in the pit of his stomach. Every operator in that building, from the greenest recruit to the most jaded instructor, knew the name Ethan Donovan. He wasn't just a commander. He was a ghost, a legend whose exploits were whispered about in the dark corners of bars from Virginia Beach to San Diego. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and a list of confirmed kills that the Department of Defense refused to acknowledge. He was the man you sent when the mission was impossible and the paperwork needed to disappear. Your father died in Syria, Logan said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more guarded. It was a classified operation 10 years ago. Contact with a superior enemy force. My father was murdered, Claire corrected him. Her voice remained level, but it had an edge like a razor blade. And someone in this building knows exactly how it happened. A younger SEAL, a petty officer named Martinez, who was known for being the best shot in his class, let out a nervous, mocking laugh. Lady, you've been watching too many movies. You need to take your conspiracy theories somewhere else. This is a place for professionals. Claire turned her gaze toward Martinez. Her eyes didn't just look at him, they seemed to disassemble him. Petty Officer Martinez, she said, her voice cutting through his bravado. Sniper qualified. You're currently holding a .7 MOA at 800 yards. Your spotter thinks you're the best he's ever seen. She paused, letting the silence hang. My father could shoot a .3 at 1,200 yards with iron sights in the middle of a Shamel sandstorm. He started teaching me how to read the wind when I was 9 years old. Martinez's smirk vanished. He really looked at her, and saw the way she held her weight, balanced on the balls of her feet, her hands loose and ready, her eyes constantly tracking the exits. Logan saw it too. The bone structure, the intensity, she stood exactly like Ethan used to stand. It was like looking at a ghost. What do you want, Claire? Logan asked, his tone shifting from authoritative to curious. 63 seconds, she replied. Logan blinked. Excuse me? Give me 63 seconds in the kill house, she said, gesturing toward the tactical shoot house at the end of the range. 5 of your best operators. Sidearms only. Simulation rounds. If I walk out of that house without a single blue paint mark on me, you listen to what I have to say about my father's death. If I don't, I leave and you never see me again. The range erupted. The SEALs began talking over each other, some laughing, some offended. The idea that a civilian woman, even the daughter of a legend, could take on 5 active-duty SEALs in a close-quarters combat environment was absurd. It was more than absurd. It was an insult to their training. You're serious, Logan said, searching her face for any sign of a bluff. My father taught me many things, she said. One of them was to never waste words on a joke when the truth is more effective. Logan should have said no. He should have called the MPs and had her barred from the base. But something about her eyes, not the grief but the cold, calculating intelligence behind them, made him hesitate. He'd served with Ethan in Ramadi. He knew what the man was capable of. Martinez, Logan called out, get 4 more volunteers. Full kit, sim rounds only. Let's see what the commander's daughter has to offer. Martinez grinned, his competitive streak taking over. He quickly tapped 4 of the most lethal shooters on the range, guys who had survived the worst Allahs of Kandahar. They moved toward the gear lockers, whispering and chuckling. This was going to be the easiest training exercise of their lives. Claire, meanwhile, knelt and opened her rifle case. Inside lay a worn M4 carbine and a Glock 19. Both weapons showed the honest wear of thousands of rounds. She checked the Glock's action with a series of movements so fluid and practiced they looked like a choreographed dance. Where did you learn to handle a weapon like that? One of the operators asked, his curiosity finally overriding his skepticism. Montana, she replied without looking up. My father built a private range behind our cabin when I was 6 years old. He didn't just teach me to shoot at targets. He made me shoot in blizzards. He made me shoot at night while he set off firecrackers to ruin my night vision. He made me run 3 miles uphill, then made me hit a 4-inch steel plate while I was gasping for air and my hands were shaking from the cold. He told me that if I couldn't hit a target when everything in my body was screaming for me to stop, I couldn't hit one when it actually mattered. Logan watched her load the simulation magazine. Her hands were rock steady. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement. It was muscle memory carved so deep into her nervous system that it had become instinct. The 5 SEALs assembled at the primary entrance of the kill house, checking their sights and winking at each other. They were going to paint her blue in 30 seconds and be back to their regular drills before lunch. Claire walked to the secondary entrance on the opposite side of the structure. She rolled her shoulders once, took a long, slow breath, and checked her holster. On the buzzer, Logan announced, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the range. He raised his hand, looking at his stopwatch. 5, 4, 3. Claire's breathing slowed until it was almost imperceptible. Her eyes went distant as if she were visualizing the entire floor plan. 2, 1, the buzzer screamed. Martinez burst through the front door, moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who had cleared 1,000 rooms. He expected chaos, a panicked civilian hiding in a corner. Instead, he found a ghost. Claire had already cleared 3 positions before he'd even crossed the threshold. Her first shot caught Martinez dead center in the chest before his brain could even process that she was in the room. A splash of blue paint erupted across his vest. "What the?" he started, but he was already out of the game. The next SEAL tried to flank through a side hallway, but Claire had anticipated the move. She dropped to one knee, rolled behind a stack of practice crates, and sent 2 rounds through the doorway at knee height. He went down cursing, his shins covered in blue. 30 seconds had vanished. 3 operators remained. They stopped laughing. They tightened their formation, using hand signals, covering every angle with textbook precision. But Claire didn't move like a textbook. She moved like water, flowing through the gaps in their coverage. She understood their training because she had been raised on it. Her father had helped write the very manuals they studied. The third operator tried a high-risk maneuver, coming through a window frame that was usually ignored in these drills. Claire heard the slight scrape of his boot against the sill. She spun and fired in one continuous motion, a single blue dot appearing right on the man's throat. 45 seconds. The final 2 SEALs realized they weren't dealing with an amateur. This was someone who had been built for violence, shaped by it from childhood. They split up, trying to bracket her, forcing her to choose a target. But Claire didn't choose. She eliminated the closer threat with 3 rapid-fire shots to the torso, then transitioned to the final man so quickly he never even managed to get his front sight on her. 58 seconds. 5 elite SEALs were standing in the kill house, covered in blue paint, looking at a woman who hadn't even broken a sweat. The final buzzer sounded. Claire holstered her Glock and walked out of the house. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just stood there waiting. Nobody spoke. The silence on the range was absolute. Logan stared at the digital timer on his clipboard, exactly 63 seconds. She hadn't even needed the full minute she'd asked for. Martinez pulled off his helmet, staring at the blue smear on his chest in disbelief. "Who the hell trained you?" he asked, his voice hushed. "I already told you," she said. "My father." Another operator wiped paint from his visor. "Nobody moves like that without years of active deployment. It's impossible." "My father knew what was coming," Claire said, her voice dropping into a somber, quiet tone. "He knew that eventually the people he worked for would try to kill him because of what he'd discovered, so he prepared me every single day. From the time I was 6 until I was 18, my life was a training cycle. Shooting, tactics, hand-to-hand, survival. He used to tell me the world was full of men who would smile at you while they were digging your grave. He said I needed to be ready to bury them first." Logan's throat felt tight. He looked at Claire and saw the man he had served within the bloody streets of Ramadi. Ethan Donovan had moved with that same economy of motion, that same chilling precision. "You said your father was murdered," Logan finally said, stepping closer. "Operation Black Tide, Syria, 2016. You were running instructor training here in Coronado when it happened, Logan, but you knew the men on that team. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, Chief Warren, Vasquez, Morrison, and Chen. They're all dead now except for Hayes, who took a medical retirement, and one other person who was never supposed to be on the manifest." Logan felt the blood drain from his face. "How do you know those names?" "That operation is still classified under a level 7 compartmentalization, because I've spent the last 10 years of my life becoming a ghost," Claire said. "I've learned how to bypass servers, how to read communication logs, and how to find the things people want to stay buried. My father's team was betrayed. Someone sold their coordinates to a local militia before they even hit the ground. They wanted them dead, all of them." "That's impossible," Logan countered, though his voice lacked conviction. "There were 3 separate military investigations. They were all shut down by Pentagon orders," Claire said, her voice rising with a controlled fury. "Anyone who asked questions was reassigned or forced into early retirement. The official report says my father died in a firefight with insurgents, but I found the original medical examiner's report before it was redacted and scrubbed from the system. My father wasn't killed by a Syrian militia. He was shot once at close range with a 9mm American-made round, in the back of the head. A heavy, suffocating chill seemed to descend over the range. "You're saying an American killed him?" Martinez whispered, his bravado completely gone. "I'm saying someone wearing the same uniform as you executed my father after his team was ambushed," Claire said. "They made it look like combat casualties, burned the evidence, and buried the truth so deep they thought it would turn to dust." Logan sat down heavily on a wooden bench, his hands beginning to shake. Why come here? Why tell us this now? Because one of the men who planned that mission is still active, Claire said. He's still wearing the uniform. He's been promoted twice since Syria. And I need access to the archives that only someone with your clearance can reach. I need to know who signed the final order to declare Black Tide classified beyond review. I need to know who benefited from my father's death. And most importantly, I need to know which bastard actually pulled the trigger. Even if what you're saying is true, Logan said slowly, his mind racing through the implications, investigating this would be the end of my career. It's treason to access those files without a direct order. We'd all go to Leavenworth. My father saved your life in Ramadi, Logan. Logan's head snapped up. How could you possibly know that? House to house clearing in the southern district, Claire said. You took shrapnel from a rigged doorway, a collapsed lung and arterial spray. The enemy was closing in, and the rest of the squad wanted to fall back to the rally point. My father refused. He carried you 2 blocks under heavy fire while you bled out on his shoulder. He stayed with you through the surgery and visited you every day for 3 weeks until you were stable. He never told anyone because he didn't believe in medals for doing what was right. Logan's eyes burned with a sudden, sharp memory. He could still feel the weight of Ethan's hand on his shoulder in that hospital bed. He had never properly thanked him because 6 months later, Ethan was gone. What do you need? Logan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Everything, Claire said. Mission planning documents, communication intercepts, financial records of the officers involved, especially anyone who came into a large sum of money right after the operation. That could take weeks, Logan said. I'll have to move slowly to avoid the internal triggers in the system. I've waited 10 years, Claire said. I can wait a few more weeks. Martinez stepped forward, followed by the other 4 SEALs who had been in the kill house. If the commander was sold out, we want in, Martinez said. He was a legend to us. If there's a traitor in the ranks, he doesn't deserve the uniform. Claire looked at them, and for the first time, the coldness in her eyes softened just a fraction. This isn't a movie, she warned. If we find what I think we're going to find, the people involved will try to kill us. Logan made a decision that would change the course of his life. I'll help you. But we do this my way, quietly, carefully. If you're lying, I'll be the one to hand you over to the MPs. But I don't think you're lying. I think you're Ethan's daughter, and I think you're right. Claire picked up her rifle case. Before she turned to leave, she stopped. Senior Chief, my father kept a journal. He wrote in it every single night. I found it hidden in the floorboards of our cabin after the funeral. The last entry was dated 2 days before he deployed for Operation Black Tide. Do you want to know what it said? Logan nodded. It said, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Someone in the chain of command has sold us out. Follow the money. Trust Logan Reeves. He's the only one who will care enough to finish this. Claire's voice cracked, just for a second, a brief glimpse of the girl who had lost her hero. So I'm trusting you, Logan, because my father never misjudged a man's character. She walked out of the range, leaving a heavy silence behind her. The next 72 hours felt like a slow-motion descent into a nightmare. Logan worked through the nights, using back-channel authorizations and old codes he'd archived from his time in intelligence. Every search felt like stepping into a minefield. He had to bypass firewalls that were designed to alert the Pentagon the moment someone looked too closely at the Black Tide files. But slowly, the truth began to bleed through the digital curtains. Operation Black Tide had been sold as a weapons recovery mission. The brief stated that American biological components had been stolen by a Syrian militia, but Logan found a secondary encrypted manifest that told a different story. The components weren't stolen, they were being delivered. It was an illegal arms deal disguised as a recovery op. And then he found the name. 2 days before the team inserted, the mission parameters were changed by Colonel Richard Vance. Vance had personally selected Ethan's team, ensuring it was composed of men who were too honorable to take a bribe and too dangerous to leave alive if they saw something they weren't supposed to. Logan dug into Vance's financial history. 3 days after the mission was declared a total loss, a transfer of $4 million was made into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account was linked to a shell company where Vance's nephew served as a silent partner. Jesus Christ, Logan whispered to the empty room. Vance hadn't just made a mistake. He had sold the lives of 6 elite warriors to protect a black market deal with a defense contractor called Prometheus Strategic Solutions. Ethan must have found the components, realized they were American-made, and refused to play along. So Vance had him executed. Logan printed the documents, his heart hammering against his ribs, and placed them in a heavy manila envelope. He called Claire's number. She answered before the first ring finished. "What did you find?" she asked. "Everything," Logan replied. "Meet me at the safe house tonight, midnight." The safe house was a nondescript cabin tucked away in the hills east of San Diego. When Claire arrived, Logan spread the documents across a wooden table. She read them with a terrifying focus, her face a mask of stone until she reached the financial records. "Vance," she said, the name sounding like a curse. "Richard Vance killed my father. He was his commanding officer. He was at our house for Christmas. He gave me a pocket knife for my 10th birthday. The evidence is all here," Logan said, "but Vance is powerful now. He's got friends in the Senate and on the Joint Chiefs. If we go to the authorities, this will be buried before the ink is dry." "I'm not going to the authorities," Claire said, looking up from the papers. "I'm going to Vance." "You can't," Logan argued. "He has a private security detail that makes the Secret Service look like amateurs. He'll have you killed before you get within a mile of him. Then I'll have to be better than his security," she said. "My father didn't train me to be a lawyer, Logan. He trained me to be a weapon. And I've been sharpening myself for 10 years for this exact moment." Logan saw the resolve in her eyes and knew there was no stopping her. "If you're going, you aren't going alone." He'd called in the men from the range, Hayes, Martinez, and the others. They arrived shortly after midnight, their faces grim as they reviewed the evidence. Hayes, the man whose life Ethan had saved in Fallujah, looked at the photo of Vance in the file. "I served under this man," Hayes said, his voice thick with disgust. "I thought he was a hero. If he did this, if he killed Ethan and the boys for a paycheck, I'll help you tear his world down." The plan began to take shape. They couldn't just kill Vance. That would only make him a martyr and keep the truth buried. They needed a confession. They needed to force him to admit what he'd done on camera with the evidence laid out before him, so the entire world would see the monster behind the medals. "We start with surveillance," Logan said. "We learn his routine, find the gaps in his security." But the universe seemed to have other plans. 2 days into their surveillance, Claire was running her usual morning route near the coast when a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up beside her. The window slid down, revealing a man in a sharp suit and expensive sunglasses. "Miss Donovan," he said with a practiced, oily smile. "Colonel Vance would like to have a word with you." Claire's hand instinctively drifted toward the concealed Glock at the small of her back. The man raised his hands in a mock gesture of peace. "Easy now, just an invitation. The colonel heard you've been asking some very pointed questions about the past. He thought you might appreciate some honest answers, off the record. A civilized conversation over dinner. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock at the Pierside Grill. Come alone. Bring whatever evidence you think you have. The colonel promises full transparency, and if I decline," Claire asked, her voice cold. The man's smile faded, replaced by something much sharper. Then the colonel stops being polite. He starts filing harassment complaints. He gets your friend Logan Reeves investigated for unauthorized access to classified servers. Maybe he even suggests to the right people that you're mentally unstable, a grieving daughter who's become a danger to herself and others. It would be a shame to see such a promising life ruined by an obsession with the past. "Tell the colonel I'll be there," Claire said. "Smart choice," the man replied, and the SUV sped away. Claire watched it go, her mind already analyzing the encounter. Vance knew. He knew about Logan, he knew about the files, and he knew where she was. They had a leak, or Vance's reach was even longer than they had feared. She went back to the safe house and told the team. "It's a trap," Martinez said immediately. "He's going to kill you the second you walk through the door." "Probably," Claire agreed. "But it's also the only chance I'll ever get to be in the same room with him. We're going to turn his trap into his cage." The night of the meeting arrived with a heavy fog rolling in off the Pacific, cloaking the San Diego harbor in a gray, spectral shroud. Claire sat in the passenger seat of Logan's truck, staring at the lights of the Pierside Grill. She checked her holster for the 5th time, the weight of the Glock 19 providing a small measure of comfort. This was the same weapon her father had used to train her in the Montana snow. It felt right that it should be with her now. "You sure about this?" Logan asked, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "If things go south, we're 300 yards away with long rifles, but that's a lot of ground to cover." "I'm sure," she said. "He thinks I'm a grieving girl looking for closure. He doesn't realize he's inviting a predator to dinner." She stepped out of the truck and walked toward the restaurant. The Pierside Grill was an upscale establishment, all glass and polished wood, overlooking the dark water of the bay. The hostess led her to a private table at the very back, situated on a secluded balcony. Colonel Richard Vance was already there, sipping a glass of expensive scotch. He looked exactly like his photos, silver hair, a perfectly tailored suit, and an air of effortless command. He rose as she approached, a warm, grandfatherly smile on his face. "Claire," he said, reaching out as if to take her hand, "you look so much like him. It's truly remarkable." Claire didn't take his hand. She sat down and placed the manila envelope on the table between them. "Let's skip the nostalgia, Richard. My father told me you were a traitor before you put a bullet in his head." "Did he?" Vance said, unfazed as he sat back down. Ethan was always a bit of a dramatist. He didn't understand the big picture. He thought the world was black and white, heroes and villains. But the world is built on gray, Claire. It's built on compromises that keep the wheels of progress turning. "You killed 6 of your own men for $2 million, Claire said, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "That's not a compromise. That's murder." Vance leaned forward, his eyes turning cold. It wasn't just about the money. Prometheus needed those components to develop a new strain of neutralized pathogens. It's a defense project that will save thousands of American lives. Your father wanted to blow the whistle because of some misplaced sense of morality. He was going to ruin a project that was vital to national security. I did what had to be done. For the country, you did it for the Cayman account, she countered. Vance laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Maybe a little of both, but who's going to believe you? You're a civilian with some stolen files. I'm a decorated hero. I have the resources of the most powerful military on Earth behind me. You're nothing but a ghost story." Claire smiled then, a slow, chilling expression that made Vance's grip on his glass tighten. "I'm not just a ghost story, Richard. I'm a live stream." Vance's brow furrowed. "What?" Claire reached up and touched the small, decorative brooch on her lapel. "It's a high-definition, wide-angle lens," she said, "connected to a satellite uplink Logan Reeves set up. Right now, this conversation is being broadcast to a secure server. And from that server, it's being forwarded to every major news outlet in the country, the Office of the Inspector General, and the Senate Armed Services Committee. You just confessed to the murder of a SEAL team and treason against the United States." Vance's face went pale, then mottled with rage. "You bitch," he snarled, reaching for the sidearm hidden under his jacket. But Claire was faster. 12 years of training culminated in a single blur-like motion. Before Vance could even clear his holster, Claire's hand was a vice around his wrist, her other hand pinning his shoulder to the chair. She didn't draw her weapon. Instead, she leaned in close, her breath warm against his ear. "My father said you'd die begging," she whispered. "But I think I'd prefer you dying in a cage, watching your legacy turn to ash while the families of the men you murdered look you in the eye." The restaurant doors burst open as Logan, Martinez, and the rest of the team flooded in, followed closely by a phalanx of federal marshals Logan had alerted. Vance tried to struggle, but the weight of his crimes and the literal weight of the operators pinning him down was too much. As they led him away in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled and his dignity stripped away, he looked back at Claire. Her face was calm, her mission finally complete. Weeks later, Claire stood at the edge of the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and the first hint of winter. She held her father's journal in one hand and a small, polished stone in the other. The truth was out. The Prometheus project had been dismantled, the conspirators were facing life sentences, and Ethan Donovan's name had been cleared, his silver star finally being presented to his daughter in a private ceremony at the White House. But none of that mattered as much as the silence of the mountains. She placed the stone on a small cairn she had built overlooking the valley. "You were right, Dad," she whispered to the wind. "They did try to bury us. They just didn't realize we were seeds." She turned and walked back toward the cabin, the weight of the past finally lifted, her father's legacy not just a story of a hero, but a testament to the daughter he had forged in the heart of the storm. The engine of the sedan idled with a low, rhythmic thrum that seemed to vibrate right through Claire's bones, echoing the frantic rhythm of her own heart. Outside the tinted glass, the upscale restaurant glowed like a warm, inviting beacon, a facade of civility that felt grotesquely out of place given the conversation happening inside the car. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, a physical force that made every breath feel like a struggle. She stared at the entrance, her reflection in the window looking like a ghost of the woman she used to be before the letters, before the digging, before the realization that her life had been built on a foundation of state-sponsored lies. Logan sat in the driver's seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the rearview mirror, scanning for the shadows he knew were there even if they couldn't see them yet. "This is insane," he said, his voice a low, jagged rasp. "Walking in there alone isn't just a risk, Claire. It's suicide. We have no idea who he has inside, no idea what kind of perimeter is set up. You're walking into a cage with a predator who's had 10 years to sharpen his claws." Claire finally turned to face him, her expression carved from the same granite her father had used to build his life. "He wants to talk," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "If he wanted me dead, I'd already be a headline. He's a man of protocol, Logan. He wants to see the threat before he neutralizes it." Maybe, Logan countered, his eyes finally meeting hers, filled with a desperate kind of protective fury. "Or maybe he just wants to see exactly how much you know before he decides how to handle you. You're a loose thread, and men like Vance don't leave those dangling." A faint, bittersweet smile touched Claire's lips. It was a memory, sharp and cold as the mountain air of her youth. "My father taught me something when I was 12, she whispered. "We were tracking elk in a blinding snowstorm up in the high country. I was freezing, terrified, and I asked him how you hunt something that's bigger, faster, and stronger than you are. Know what he said?" Logan shook his head slowly, the tension in his shoulders never wavering. He said, "You don't fight it head-on. You don't match strength for strength because you'll lose every time. Instead, you make it think it's hunting you. You lead it where you want it to go, and you turn the tables the very moment it gets comfortable." She reached for the door handle, the cold metal biting into her palm. "That's what I'm doing, Logan. Vance thinks he's the one in control. He thinks he invited me here to dictate terms. I'm going to let him believe that right up until the moment I destroy him." She paused, her gaze turning solemn. "And if something goes wrong, then you have everything. The records, the shell company links, the ballistics. Take it to someone who can't be bought. Don't go through the chain of command. Go to the people. Finish what my father started." Before Logan could offer another argument, Claire climbed out into the cool night air. The door clicked shut with a finality that sent a shiver down her spine. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed her hair, and began the long walk toward the restaurant entrance. With every step, she felt the phantom weight of her father walking beside her. It felt like a pilgrimage toward his grave, toward the jagged truth of his final moments, toward a reckoning that had been 10 years in the making. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of expensive cigars and rain-slicked pavement, a world of privilege and power that she was about to set on fire. The hostess greeted her with a practiced, porcelain smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Reservation named Donovan," Claire said. The woman's smile flickered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in the armor of the establishment. "Of course, right this way," she murmured, her voice hushed as if she were leading a mourner to a viewing. They moved through the main dining room, a sea of clinking silverware and low-frequency laughter. To the casual observer, it was just another night of high-end dining, but Claire saw the seams. She counted the exits, noted the blind spots of the security cameras, and spotted at least 2 men who carried themselves with the rigid, hyper-aware stillness of contractors. One leaned against the bar, his eyes tracking her with clinical precision. Another stood near the kitchen entrance, his hand hovering near the hem of his jacket. Vance was waiting in a secluded corner table, partially obscured by a decorative stone pillar. He looked exactly like the man from the news clippings and the official portraits. 60-some, silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a suit that likely cost more than most people's cars. He had the kind of face that belonged on recruiting posters. Distinguished, trustworthy, a portrait of patriotic duty. It was a complete and total lie, a mask worn so long it had become indistinguishable from the skin beneath it. He stood as she approached, extending a hand with the practiced grace of a diplomat. "Miss Donovan, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd accept the invitation." Claire didn't look at the hand. She didn't acknowledge the gesture of civility. She simply pulled out the chair and sat down, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that would have made a lesser man flinch. Vance's smile tightened, the muscles in his jaw dancing for a second before he recovered his smooth, unflappable composure. He sat back down, folding his hands on the table. "I understand you've been asking questions about your father," he began, his voice a soothing baritone. "It's understandable. Ethan Donovan was a remarkable man, a true servant of this country. His death was a tragedy that we all felt deeply. His murder was a tragedy," Claire corrected him, the words sharp and cold. "His death wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a tactical failure. It was an execution." Vance settled back in his chair, his expression unreadable, like a gambler holding a dead man's hand. Strong words, Miss Donovan. Accusations of that magnitude require more than just grief to sustain them. Do you have any actual evidence to support such a colorful theory? Claire didn't hesitate. She began reciting the facts like a litany of sins. Financial records showing $2.4 million transferred to a shell company in the Caymans, a company directly connected to your nephew, just 3 days before Operation Black Tide. Mission parameters that were changed at the 11th hour by your personal authorization. Communication protocols that intentionally isolated my father's team, cutting them off from any hope of backup. And then there are the medical examiner reports, the ones that were suppressed, showing my father wasn't killed by enemy fire. He was shot with American-grade ammunition at point-blank range. Should I continue, Colonel? I have the logs for the transport flights as well. Something flickered in Vance's eyes. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was something closer to surprise or perhaps a dark kind of respect. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time not as Ethan's daughter but as a genuine adversary. "You've been busy," he remarked quietly. "I've been patient," Claire replied. "There's a very big difference between the two." Vance reached for the glass carafe on the table and poured himself a glass of water. His hand was perfectly steady, a testament to the decades he'd spent navigating the deadliest corridors of power. "Let's say, hypothetically, that your theory has some merit, that there were complexities to that mission that the public record doesn't reflect. What exactly is it that you want? Money? Closure? A formal apology typed on government letterhead. "I want you to confess," Claire said, leaning forward until she was inches from his face. "I want you on camera, detailing every single choice you made. I want to know who paid you, why they paid you, and exactly how you justified betraying the men who looked up to you as a leader. I want you to tell the world that Commander Ethan Donovan didn't die because of a mistake. He died because he was a better man than you, and he died trying to stop you." Vance did something then that she hadn't expected. He laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh, but a dry, hollow sound that seemed to echo the emptiness of the room. "That is remarkably naive, Claire. Even if every word you believed were the absolute truth, do you honestly think I would simply sit here and dismantle my life for you? Destroy a career that has spanned 40 years? Face a firing squad for the sake of your conscience?" "I think you're already destroyed," Claire said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "You just don't know it yet. You're a ghost haunting a burning house, Vance." The amusement drained from his face instantly, replaced by a cold, predatory hardness. "Careful, Miss Donovan. You're playing a game you don't understand. You're poking at things that have the power to erase people like you from the map." "My father understood the game perfectly," she shot back. "That's why you had to kill him. He was the one thing your system couldn't absorb." Vance leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the table. "Your father died because he couldn't leave well enough alone, because he kept digging when he was told to stop. He kept asking questions that didn't have comfortable answers, and he threatened to expose things that were never meant to see the light of day. He made a choice, Claire. And in our world, choices have consequences. Permanent ones. What things?" Claire demanded, her hands clenching into fists beneath the tablecloth. "What was so important that 5 good men had to be sacrificed?" "Classified things," Vance said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial hum. "Things far above your pay grade, and if I'm being honest, above mine as well. Strategic interests that required difficult, often ugly decisions. Your father was a brilliant operator, one of the best I've ever seen, but he was a man who couldn't see the forest for the trees. He thought he was protecting his country by being a Boy Scout. In reality, he was threatening national security by exposing weapons trafficking routes that we were using to maintain stability in the region. He was threatening relationships that keep millions of Americans safe in their beds. You think the world runs on principles and sunshine. It doesn't. It runs on compromises, backroom deals, and the kind of ugly necessities that people like your father were too idealistic to comprehend. "So you murdered him," she said, the realization settling in her gut like lead. "You murdered him to keep the machine running." "I eliminated a security threat before it could metastasize into something uncontrollable," Vance corrected her, his voice devoid of any hint of remorse. "That's what professionals do. We make the hard calls, and we live with the weight of them so you don't have to." He paused, taking a slow sip of his water. "But I didn't ask you here to debate the ethics of shadow warfare. I asked you here to offer you a choice, a way out." "What choice?" "Walk away," Vance said simply. "Take whatever files you think you have and burn them. Stop the phone calls, stop the digging, and stop looking over your shoulder. Move on with your life. In exchange, I will see to it that you are taken care of. A full government pension for your father's service, consulting opportunities in the private sector, a future where you never have to worry about a roof over your head or a target on your back. You're trying to buy me off, Claire said, her voice dripping with contempt. I'm trying to save your life, Vance snapped, his composure finally fraying at the edges. Because if you keep pushing this, you won't like what happens next. The people who are invested in keeping the past buried are far more dangerous than I am. They don't negotiate. They don't offer pensions. They simply eliminate the problem at the source. Claire met his eyes with a gaze that didn't blink. I've been shot at, Vance. I've been followed across 3 states. My cabin has been broken into and someone tried to run me off a mountain road in Montana. And you know what? I'm still here. I'm still digging and I'm still coming for you. My father didn't just teach me how to hunt. He spent 12 years preparing me for exactly this moment. He knew the world was full of men like you, and he made sure I was the one thing you couldn't handle. Vance's expression hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated coldness. Ethan really did a number on you, didn't he? He turned his own daughter into a weapon. What kind of father does that to a child? The kind who knew that monsters wear uniforms, Claire replied. The kind who knew that the truth is the only thing worth dying for. I'm not a monster, Vance said quietly. I'm a patriot who made the choices no one else had the stomach for. No, she countered. You're a traitor who murdered 5 of his own brothers for a payout. Vance's hand moved with a blurred speed that Claire almost missed. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek black smartphone and set it on the table between them. He tapped the screen twice. A video began to play, and as Claire watched, the blood in her veins seemed to turn to ice. The footage was high definition, taken from a long-range thermal camera. It showed Logan's safe house. It showed her walking inside just 48 hours ago. It showed every member of the team entering at different times, their faces clear. It showed them gathered around the table, spreading out the very documents she had just threatened him with. Misuse of classified information, Vance said, his voice a low, rhythmic drone. Unauthorized access to restricted military databases. Conspiracy to commit espionage against the United States. That is what I will charge every single one of your friends with if you don't walk out of this restaurant right now. They'll spend the rest of their natural lives in Leavenworth, disgraced, forgotten, and stripped of everything they've ever worked for. And the best part? It will be entirely your fault. Claire's chest tightened, a band of iron squeezing the air out of her lungs. He'd been watching them the whole time. He'd known exactly where they were, what they were doing, and who was helping her. He hadn't just been waiting for her to come to him. He'd been building a cage around everyone she cared about. You see the position you're in now, Vance continued, his voice regaining its smug, authoritative edge. You can't win this. You can't beat me in a system I helped build. The best you can do now is minimize the damage. Walk away. Let your father rest in the peace he earned. Let your friends keep their lives and their careers, or you can push forward and watch everyone you care about burn to ashes. The choice is yours, Miss Donovan, but I suggest you make it quickly. Claire stared at the video still playing on the screen. She watched herself pointing at a map. She watched Hayes nodding in agreement. She watched Logan on the phone, likely checking on her safety. A heavy silence hung between them, broken only by the distant clink of glasses from the main dining room. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, Claire began to smile. Vance frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. Is something funny? You really think I came here unprepared? Claire said. She reached into her blazer, moving slowly so as not to alert the contractors at the bar. She pulled out her own phone and set it right beside Vance's. I've been recording this entire conversation, she said. Every word, every threat, every admission of guilt. Vance's face went pale, the silver-haired facade cracking to reveal the panicked man beneath. That's inadmissible, he stammered. A secret recording, and you know what the best part is? Claire interrupted, her voice gaining strength with every word. This phone isn't just recording, it's streaming. Directly to 3 separate, secure servers. One domestic, one international, and one buried deep in the dark web. You can't stop it, you can't delete it. You can't make it disappear with a phone call to the NSA. The moment something happens to me, the moment my heart rate drops or the signal is cut, everything goes public. Every news outlet, every military oversight committee, every social media platform on the planet. They'll hear your confession. They'll hear your threats. They'll hear you admit that you killed a commander of the United States Navy because he was a security threat. Vance's hand shot across the table like a striking snake. He grabbed her phone and smashed it against the edge of the table, the screen shattering into 1,000 crystalline shards before he threw the carcass of the device to the floor. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. "That was just the display unit, Vance," she said calmly. "The actual recording device is somewhere you'll never find it, and killing me now, that just proves everything I've said. It makes you look exactly as guilty as you are." Vance's breathing had gone ragged, his chest heaving under the expensive fabric of his suit. The polished veneer was gone, replaced by a raw, primal desperation. "You stupid girl," he hissed. "You have no idea what you've done. You have no idea the forces you've just unleashed." "I've done exactly what my father taught me," she said. "I prepared, I adapted, and I won." Vance stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The two contractors at the bar and the kitchen entrance immediately began moving toward the table, their hands dipping toward their waistbands. Claire tensed, her heart hammering against her ribs, but before they could reach her, the front doors of the restaurant swung open. Logan walked through the entrance, his face a mask of grim determination. He wasn't alone. Behind him were 4 more men, SEALs who had served with her father, men who looked like they were walking into a combat zone. They were armed, they were ready, and they moved with a lethal synchronization that froze the contractors in their tracks. "Seems we're at an impasse," Claire said, standing up to meet Vance's gaze. "You can't touch me without exposing yourself to the world. I can't prove you pulled the trigger on my father without better evidence. So here's what's going to happen next. You're going to sit back down and you're going to tell me everything. Where the weapons went, who paid the bribes, and why my father had to die, and I'm going to record every single syllable of it. Why would I ever agree to that?" Vance spat, though his eyes were darting toward the exits now covered by Logan's team. "Because if you don't, I release what I already have right now," Claire said. "You'll spend whatever time you have left on this earth fighting investigations, congressional hearings, and criminal charges. Your reputation will be destroyed even if they can't make the murder charges stick. Or you confess now and I give you a head start. 24 hours to disappear before I go public. Vanish. Start over somewhere without an extradition treaty. It's more mercy than you showed my father, and it's the only deal you're ever going to get." Vance's jaw clenched so hard she could hear the bone grind. He looked around the restaurant, seeing the trap for what it was. He saw the cold eyes of the men who had been like sons to the man he murdered. He saw the phone on the floor. He sat back down, his movements heavy, as if the gravity of the room had suddenly increased. "Smart choice," Claire said, her voice like a blade. "Now start talking." But Vance didn't start with the mission. He didn't start with Operation Black Tide. He leaned back, his eyes fixed on some distant point in the past. "Do you know what your father's biggest weakness was?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "He believed in absolute right and wrong, black and white, no gray areas. In our line of work, that kind of thinking is a death sentence. It gets people killed. He's dead and you're alive," Claire said. "Maybe he was right to believe in something more than survival. He was naive," Vance countered. Operation Black Tide wasn't about weapons components. That was the cover story for the bureaucrats. It was about leverage. The Syrian facility we raided wasn't abandoned. It was a meeting point, a place where certain parties conducted business that the official channels couldn't acknowledge. Your father's team wasn't sent there to recover stolen property. They were sent there to eliminate witnesses. Claire felt a cold, oily sensation coil in the pit of her stomach. "What witnesses?" "American intelligence officers," Vance said, a dark smile playing on his lips. "Men who had gone rogue, who were selling classified encryption keys to the highest foreign bidders. The weapons components were just the excuse to authorize the tactical strike. The real objective was cleaning up a mess before it became a national scandal. And your father, he discovered the truth during the mission prep. He intercepted communications he wasn't supposed to see. He realized the targets weren't enemy combatants. They were American citizens, civilians. He threatened to abort," Claire realized, the pieces falling into place with a sickening thud. "He threatened to report everything up the chain to expose the whole operation. I tried to reason with him," Vance insisted, his voice rising in a desperate attempt at justification. "I explained the bigger picture. These weren't innocent people. They'd already sold secrets that got soldiers killed in the field. They'd compromised operations and endangered the lives of thousands. Eliminating them was justice. But Ethan couldn't see past his moral code. He said he wouldn't participate in state-sanctioned murder. He said he'd make sure everyone involved faced the consequences. He left me no choice." Claire felt sick. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Who gave the order? She asked, her voice trembling for the first time. Does it even matter? Vance asked. I followed the orders I was given. I eliminated the threat and I kept the secret. That's what soldiers do. Soldiers don't murder their own brothers, Claire hissed. Brothers who threaten everything we've built. Yes, they do, Vance said. It's called survival. It's called treason. Claire shouted, her voice echoing through the silent restaurant. Vance laughed bitterly. Call it whatever helps you sleep at night. But your father's death served a purpose. Those rogue officers were silenced. Their network was dismantled. The leak stopped. American lives were saved because of what happened that night. One man died so that thousands could live. In my world, that's called a necessary sacrifice. In my world, Claire said, it's called a cover-up. You killed him because he was going to expose you. Everything else is just noise you use to drown out the sound of your own conscience. Believe what you want, Vance said, standing up slowly. But know this. The people who authorized Operation Black Tide are still in power. They're still making the decisions that keep this country moving. You release your recordings, and what happens? A few careers end. Some politicians give speeches about transparency, and then everything continues exactly as it did before. Because the world needs people like me to make the choices you can't stomach. The world needs the truth, Claire said, her voice like iron, and they're about to get it. I've heard enough. She stood up, her legs feeling like lead, but her mind clearer than it had ever been. Where are you going? Vance asked, a flicker of genuine fear finally crossing his face. To finish what my father started, she said. You can't prove a word of this. Vance shouted as she turned away. It's my word against a dead man's. It's the word of a decorated hero against a grieving daughter who's clearly lost her mind. I don't need to prove it in a court of law, Vance, Claire said, looking back over her shoulder. I just need the public to hear your voice. Once they hear this recording, once they see the evidence of the shell companies and the suppressed ballistics, your life as you know it is over. Maybe you avoid a cell. Maybe you have enough friends in high places to escape a trial, but you'll never escape the truth. Everyone will know. Your family, your peers, the history books. You'll die remembered as the coward who murdered his own men for a lie. It wasn't about the money, Vance whispered, his voice cracking. Then what was it about? Control, Vance said, power, making sure the right people stayed in charge of the narrative. Your father threatened that balance. He had to go. And now I'm the one threatening it, Claire said. Yes, you are, Vance agreed, which means you'll likely end up just like him. Claire didn't answer. She turned and walked toward the door, Logan and his team forming a protective phalanx around her. The contractors stayed frozen, their eyes tracking the seals with a mixture of fear and respect. But as she reached the exit, Vance called out one last time, his voice a jagged edge in the quiet room. Do you want to know what his last words were? Claire stopped. Every muscle in her body tensed, her breath hitching in her throat. He said, tell Claire I'm sorry, Vance said, his voice dropping to a low, haunting murmur. He said he was sorry for putting this burden on you. Sorry for training you for a war you should never have had to fight. Sorry for everything. Vance paused, a strange, twisted shadow of emotion crossing his face. Then he asked me to make it quick, and I did, because despite everything, I respected Ethan Donovan. He was wrong, but he was the bravest man I ever knew, just like his daughter. Claire didn't turn around. She didn't let him see the tears that finally broke free and tracked down her cheeks. She didn't let him see the grief that threatened to pull her under. You'll be hearing from me soon, she said, her voice thick but steady. Then she stepped out into the night. The cool air hit her like a physical shock. Logan caught up with her in the parking lot, his hand landing gently on her shoulder. Did you get what you needed? Every word, she whispered. The confession, the motive, the names, it's all there. Logan nodded, his jaw set. Then we take this to the authorities. We go to JAG, we go to the IG. We let the system handle its own. Claire shook her head, wiping the tears from her face with the back of her hand. The system has protected him for 10 years, Logan. The system is what killed my father. We can't trust it to fix itself. Then what's the plan? We go public, she said, all of it. We upload the recordings to every server we have. We leak the documents to every major news desk in the country. We make so much noise that they can't bury the truth this time. We force them to look at what they've done. Hayes stepped forward, his eyes dark with the weight of the revelation. That'll start a war, Claire. The Pentagon will come after every one of us. They'll call us traitors. They'll try to erase us. Good, Claire said. Let them come. Let them try to explain to the American people why they covered up the murder of 5 of their finest warriors. Let them try to justify betraying their own blood. I'm done playing by the rules of a game that's rigged in favor of murderers. Your father wouldn't want this, Logan said quietly. He'd want you to be smart. He'd want you to be strategic, not just burn the whole world down. Claire turned to face him, her expression hardening into something resembling steel. My father died trying to do the right thing quietly, she said. He tried to work within the system, and they murdered him for it. They threw his body in a hole and they rewrote the history books. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm making sure the whole world knows the truth, and if that burns down the entire corrupt structure, then so be it. Logan studied her face for a long moment. He saw the same fire that had burned in Ethan Donovan's eyes, the same unbreakable will. Okay, he said finally. We do it your way, but we do it smart. We release the data in stages. We build the pressure until it's a landslide. We coordinate with the few journalists we know can't be intimidated. How long? Claire asked. A few weeks, maybe a month to do it right. We need to secure our families and disappear before the first headline hits. 1 month, Claire agreed, and Vance's 24-hour head start begins right now. The drive back to the safe house was a blur of neon lights and shadow. Claire stared out the window, watching the city pass by like a dream. Her father had died in the dark in some forgotten warehouse halfway around the world, his name slandered and his legacy stolen. She was going to make sure he lived in the light. She was going to bring him home. But when they reached the safe house, the silence was the first thing they noticed. The front door was standing ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. Logan immediately drew his weapon, signaling for the team to fan out. They moved through the entrance with tactical precision, checking every corner, every shadow. The living room had been systematically destroyed. The furniture was overturned, the documents they'd spent weeks organizing were scattered like autumn leaves, and the computers were smashed into useless piles of plastic and glass. And there, on the far wall, written in jagged strokes of red paint, was a message. Stop digging or everyone you love dies next. Claire stood frozen in the center of the room, her breath coming in shallow gasps. They'd been here, in their sanctuary. In the one place they thought they were safe. They know everything, Hayes whispered, his voice tight with a mixture of rage and fear. They've been ahead of us the whole time. Logan checked his phone, his face turning a sickly shade of gray as he scrolled through his notifications. I've got missed calls from 3 different encrypted numbers, he said. He listened to a voicemail, his hand shaking slightly. They took Martinez. What? Claire asked, her heart dropping. He was running surveillance on Vance's house, Logan said. The team says a black van intercepted him 2 hours ago. He's gone. They are cleaning house, Claire realized, the horror of it washing over her. Vance's 24-hour head start wasn't for him to run. It was a countdown for us. He's eliminating the loose ends before we can go public. We need to disappear, Logan said, his tactical instincts taking over. We need to go underground, regroup, find a way to get Martinez back. No, Claire said, her voice rising with a sudden, fierce clarity. We push forward. We release everything right now, tonight. But Martinez, if we back down, they'll kill him anyway, she argued. They are already committed. The only way to save him is to make it impossible for them to hide. We expose them so completely that they can't afford to kill anyone else. We force them into the light where they can't move. Logan looked at Hayes, then at the other SEALs. He saw the same conflict in their eyes, the desire to protect their brother versus the knowledge that the truth was their only real weapon. Your call, Senior Chief, Hayes finally said. Logan closed his eyes for a heartbeat, likely seeing Ethan Donovan's face in the darkness of his mind. Then he opened them and looked at Claire. We go public. Now, everything we have. Claire pulled her backup laptop from her bag and began the process. She watched the progress bars crawl across the screen as gigabytes of evidence were uploaded to servers across the globe. Recordings, financial records, the names of every shell company, the suppressed reports, all of it. The truth about Operation Black Tide began to spread like a digital wildfire. Within an hour, the first fringe news sites began to pick it up. Within 2, it had reached the mainstream. By 3 in the morning, the Pentagon was in a state of absolute, unmitigated crisis. Somewhere in the darkness, Colonel Richard Vance was realizing that his carefully constructed world was collapsing. The war Claire's father had started was entering its final, most desperate phase. And this time, the whole world was watching. The news broke officially at midnight. Social media was a torrent of outrage and confusion. The phone lines at the White House and the Pentagon were jammed as staffers scrambled to draft statements that would never be enough. Claire watched it all from a cramped motel room 40 miles outside of San Diego, her eyes burning from the glow of the screen. It's working, Logan said, his voice weary but satisfied. People are finally paying attention. Attention isn't justice, Claire replied, her gaze fixed on a photo of her father on the screen. Vance is still out there. Martinez is still missing, and we don't know who was at the top of the pyramid. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, an unknown, blocked number. She picked it up, putting it on speaker. "Impressive work, Miss Donovan," a smooth, unfamiliar voice said. It wasn't Vance. This voice was deeper, more resonant, carrying the weight of true authority. "You've caused quite a commotion, the kind of noise that's hard to ignore." "Who is this?" Claire demanded. "Someone who appreciates your dedication," the voice replied. "Your father would be very proud of the weapon you've become." "Stop playing games," Claire snapped. "What do you want?" "I want to offer you something Colonel Vance couldn't," the stranger said. "I want to give you the whole truth, not just the pieces Vance knew. I want to tell you who really gave the orders for Black Tide and why your father had to be the one to pay the price. I want to give you the head of the snake." "I'm listening," Claire said, her grip tightening on the phone. "Not over the phone," the voice said. "Face to face. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. There's an abandoned airfield 30 miles outside of Yuma. Come alone, no weapons, no recording devices, no backup, just you and your questions." "That's a suicide mission," Claire said. "That's a trap." "It's an invitation," the voice corrected. "You want the answers. This is how you get them. Refuse and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering who really pulled the strings. Because Vance, he was just the trigger man. The person who really killed Ethan Donovan is someone you'd never suspect." The line went dead. Logan grabbed the phone, his face set in a mask of concern. "That's an ambush, Claire. You can't go." "Maybe," she said, her eyes looking toward the horizon where the first hint of dawn was beginning to break. "But what if it's the only way to finish this?" "Then we're coming with you," Logan said. "Hidden positions, overwatch. The second things go sideways, we move in. They said come alone," she reminded him. "They probably said that to your father too," Hayes added, stepping into the light of the room. "Look how that turned out. We're not letting you go in there without a shield." Claire looked at the men who had risked everything for her. She saw the love they had for her father, the loyalty that had survived a decade of lies. They deserved to see this through to the end just as much as she did. "Okay," she said, "we do it together. One last mission, for Ethan." Logan stood by the window of the cramped, salt-aired motel room, his silhouette framed by the flickering neon sign outside. He didn't like the plan, and he wasn't hiding it. He'd seen too many operations go sideways when the emotional stakes were this high, but he also knew there was no turning back for Claire. She was too far gone, too deep into the ghost of her father's legacy to walk away now. Finally, he turned, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the hum of the air conditioner. He told her that if she was going to do this, she had to do it his way. He would be there, but he had to stay invisible. If the people they were meeting even caught a whiff of backup, they'd vanish into the ether, and the trail would go cold forever. Claire didn't argue. She just nodded, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Logan checked his watch and told her they were leaving in 4 hours. He advised her to get some rest, but they both knew that was a hollow suggestion. Claire sat on the edge of the sagging motel bed, the springs groaning under her slight frame. In her lap lay her father's journal, a weathered leather-bound book she had unearthed from a floorboard in their remote Montana cabin. It was more than a diary. It was a blueprint of a life lived in the shadows and a warning from beyond the grave. She traced the jagged handwriting of the final entry, words that had become a mantra in her mind over the last few days. Her father had written that if she was reading those words, it meant he was already gone. He spoke of a betrayal, of money trails that led into the heart of the capital, and a single name he told her she could trust: Logan Reeves. He had described Logan as the only man with enough of a soul left to finish what had been started. It was a chilling realization that Ethan Donovan had prepared for his own execution, leaving behind breadcrumbs for the daughter he had spent years training. Every weekend at the range, every survival drill in the freezing wilderness, every lesson on situational awareness. It hadn't just been father-daughter bonding. It had been a curriculum for survival in a war he knew she would eventually have to fight. The clock struck 5 o'clock a.m. with a dull, mechanical click. The air outside was crisp and biting as they loaded into the vehicles. Logan took the wheel of the lead truck with Claire in the passenger seat, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the first hints of dawn were beginning to bleed into the sky. Behind them, Hayes and the rest of the team followed in a second vehicle, packed with long-range rifles, thermal optics, and high-frequency surveillance gear. The 90-minute drive toward Yuma was a study in silence. The highway cut through the vast, empty desert like a scar. the landscape painted in shades of bruised purple and deep orange as the sun climbed higher. They were heading toward an abandoned airfield, a relic of a forgotten era of aviation that the mysterious caller had designated as the meeting point. When the runway finally came into view, it was a desolate sight, cracked asphalt overgrown with scrub brush, a collapsed hangar leaning like a skeleton against the wind, and rusted fuel tanks that looked like they hadn't held a drop of kerosene in decades. Logan slowed the truck, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. He muttered that the whole place felt wrong, a sentiment that resonated in the pit of Claire's stomach. It was too quiet, too perfect for an ambush. But as Claire pointed out, the fact that it felt like a trap didn't necessarily mean it wasn't their only shot at the truth. She checked her watch, 5:58 a.m. She told Logan to drop her at the main runway and then get his team into elevated positions. Her instructions were clear. If the shooting started, they weren't to hesitate. They were to take everyone down. When Logan asked about her safety, she didn't flinch. She told him she could handle herself, a confidence forged in the years of grueling training her father had put her through. She stepped out of the truck, the desert air still and cool against her skin, and watched as Logan's vehicle veered off into the brush to find cover. She walked toward the center of the runway, the sound of her boots crunching on the broken asphalt echoing in the vast emptiness. A hawk screamed somewhere in the distance, a lonely sound that only amplified her sense of exposure. She stood there, a small figure in the middle of a massive, dead airfield, feeling the weight of the hidden eyes she knew were watching her. 6 o'clock came and went with agonizing slowness. For a moment, she felt a wave of foolishness wash over her, wondering if she had chased a ghost into the desert for nothing. Then, a voice cut through the silence from directly behind her. It was a calm, measured voice that noted how much she moved and stood like Commander Donovan. Claire spun around, her hand instinctively moving toward the sidearm concealed beneath her jacket. Standing 20 feet away was a woman who looked more like a corporate executive than a spy. She was in her late 50s, her hair a sharp bob of silver gray, dressed in a professional business suit that looked entirely out of place in the dust of the Yuma Desert. Her eyes were weary, the eyes of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and survived it. She introduced herself as Sarah Chen, the deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The name hit Claire like a physical blow. She remembered the name Chen. Her father's team had included a Navy hospital corpsman named Chen, a man her father had spoken of with immense respect. Sarah confirmed the connection. He had been her younger brother, and he had died because of the same betrayal that took Ethan Donovan. The revelation sent Claire's mind into a tailspin. If Sarah Chen held such a high position in the DIA, why was she meeting a civilian in the middle of nowhere? Why hadn't she used her vast resources to expose the truth through official channels? Sarah's answer was grim and immediate. She explained that the conspiracy surrounding Operation Black Tide went far higher than anyone realized. It reached beyond rogue commanders or mid-level bureaucrats. It reached into the hallowed halls of the White House and the very top of the Pentagon. There were people in positions of absolute power who had authorized the mission and subsequently ordered the team's elimination to cover their tracks. These were people, she warned, who would burn the entire country to the ground before they allowed the truth to see the light of day. The name that finally escaped Sarah's lips sent a chill down Claire's spine. Marcus Webb, the Secretary of Defense. Back in 2016, he had been the Deputy Secretary, and Operation Black Tide had been his brainchild. It was Webb who had funneled the money to Vance to ensure that the SEAL team never made it home. When Claire asked what could possibly be worth the lives of 5 elite operators, Sarah didn't answer with words. Instead, she pulled out a tablet and turned the screen toward Claire. What followed was a deluge of classified documents, encrypted emails, and complex financial ledgers, all tied to a program known as Project Prometheus. It was a black-budget nightmare involving billions of dollars in illegal defense contracts, the development of prohibited bioweapons, and the sale of sensitive American military technology to foreign entities, all of it flagrantly illegal under international law. Sarah explained that Ethan Donovan's team hadn't just been on a routine mission. They had accidentally stumbled onto a high-level meeting between Webb's representatives and foreign buyers in a Syrian warehouse. They had seen faces they weren't supposed to see and heard names that were never meant to be spoken. From that moment on, they were dead men walking. Webb couldn't risk the scandal, so he turned a state-sanctioned operation into a private massacre. Claire scrolled through the files, her hands trembling with a mixture of grief and pure, unadulterated rage. This wasn't just corruption, it was treason on a global scale. Sarah had been building this case in secret for 3 years, but she was honest about her limitations. Webb was too protected, his influence too pervasive within the system. Any move she made through legal channels would be intercepted and neutralized before it even reached a judge. That was why she had sought out Claire. As a civilian and the daughter of a fallen hero, Claire had a weapon that Sarah didn't: the power of public perception. If Claire were the one to release the information, it would be much harder for Webb to make her disappear without confirming his own guilt. The fire had already been started by Claire's investigation. Sarah was simply providing the gasoline to burn the whole structure down. She handed Claire a USB drive, a small piece of plastic that contained the power to topple a cabinet member. But she offered a final, stern warning. The moment Claire went public with this data, her life as she knew it would end. She would be hunted by private armies, discredited by state-controlled media, and forced to live the rest of her days looking over her shoulder. Claire didn't hesitate. She told Sarah that her normal life had ended the day her father was murdered. The conversation turned to more immediate tragedies. Claire asked about Martinez, the SEAL who had risked everything to help her. Sarah's expression softened into one of genuine regret. She informed Claire that Martinez was dead, his body dumped in the desert 50 miles away only hours ago. The news was a hammer blow. Martinez had a wife and a daughter. He was a young man who believed in the honor of the uniform, and now he was gone because he had chosen to help her. Claire felt a crushing weight of guilt, but Sarah wouldn't let her carry it. She told Claire that the guilt belonged to Webb and Vance, and that the only way to honor the dead was to finish the mission. With a final look of shared understanding, Sarah Chen walked away, her figure disappearing into the shimmering heat haze of the desert morning. Claire stood alone for a long moment, the USB drive clutched tightly in her palm. Logan's voice crackled in her ear, reminding her that they had recorded the entire encounter from their surveillance positions. He asked what the next move was. For Claire, there was only one path forward. They were going after Webb. They would release everything and force the Secretary of Defense out of the shadows. Logan was skeptical, pointing out that Webb was backed by the entire military-industrial complex, but Claire remained undeterred. Her father had proven that no one was untouchable. He had found the truth, and now she was going to make sure the world saw it. They drove back to the motel in a state of high alert, but the news waiting for them there only heightened the tension. Hayes reported that Vance had vanished. His house was stripped, his bank accounts were drained, and his nephew had been found dead in what was being staged as a suicide. Webb was cleaning house, systematically eliminating every loose end that could tie him to the conspiracy. Claire knew they were running out of time. She plugged the drive into her laptop and began the grueling process of sorting through the evidence. It was even more damning than she had imagined. There were actual recordings of Webb discussing the disposal of the SEAL team as if they were nothing more than faulty equipment. As the first files began to upload to a secure cloud server, Claire's phone rang. It was an unrecognized number. She answered and put it on speaker, her blood turning to ice when the voice on the other end identified himself as Secretary Marcus Webb. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He told her he knew exactly where she was and who she was with. He laughed off her threats of evidence, calling the documents classified materials obtained through illegal channels that would hold no weight in a court of law. He painted her as a traitor and a threat to national security, asserting that he controlled the narrative and the investigations. He spoke of power with a chilling detachment, claiming that sometimes good men like her father had to die so that better things could happen. Webb's arrogance was boundless. He admitted to the executions but framed them as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of American interests. He told Claire that even if she released the files, she would be the one arrested by the FBI and the CIA, while he would remain in his Pentagon office, continuing to shape the world as he saw fit. When the line went dead, the room was thick with a heavy, suffocating silence. Logan was the first to speak, noting that Webb had effectively backed them into a corner. If they released the files, they were criminals. If they didn't, the murders would go unpunished. But Hayes had a different idea. He suggested that they shouldn't just release the files to the media, they should force Webb into a position where he had to confess on his own terms. The plan they devised over the next 6 hours was nothing short of suicidal. They needed a lever, something Webb couldn't control or ignore. That lever was his daughter, Amanda Webb. Amanda was a 28-year-old consultant who worked for the very defense contractors her father protected. She lived a life of luxury and security in a Georgetown townhouse, but she was the one thing Marcus Webb truly seemed to value. Claire made it clear that they weren't going to kidnap her. That would play right into Webb's hands. Instead, they were going to show her the truth and let her make her own choice. It was a gamble of the highest order, but as Claire looked at the photo of the fallen Martinez, she knew it was the only play left. They spent the day meticulously studying Amanda's schedule and the security protocols of her Georgetown detail. By 8:00 p.m., they were in position. As Amanda entered her car in a darkened underground parking garage, Claire was already waiting in the back seat. The initial panic in Amanda's eyes subsided slightly when she saw that Claire was unarmed and holding a laptop. Claire spoke quickly, introducing herself as the daughter of the man Amanda's father had ordered killed. She told Amanda that her security was currently distracted by a diversion and that she had exactly 3 minutes to look at the screen. What followed was a harrowing experience for the young woman. She sat in the backseat of her own car, listening to her father's voice authorize murders and discuss illegal arms deals with the cold efficiency of a CEO discussing quarterly earnings. Amanda tried to deny it, calling it a deepfake or a fabrication, but as more documents appeared, documents bearing her father's unmistakable signature and detailing internal Pentagon secrets she knew were real, her resolve began to crumble. Claire didn't plead or threaten. She simply presented the cold, hard facts of Marcus Webb's career. She explained that 5 men had died to protect a criminal empire, and she asked Amanda how many more lives had to be lost before someone stood up to him. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of a shattered reality. Amanda looked at Claire, seeing not a terrorist or a criminal, but a woman who had been hollowed out by grief and a quest for justice. Finally, Amanda asked what Claire wanted her to do. The plan was simple but dangerous. Amanda would lure her father to a confrontation, a place where he would feel obligated to speak the truth. It took another 48 hours of intense preparation, 48 hours of hiding in safe houses and checking for tails, before the final stage was set. The location was Arlington National Cemetery. It was a place of profound silence and history, a fitting backdrop for a final reckoning. At midnight, the cemetery was a sea of white headstones under a cold, pale moon. Claire stood back in the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched Amanda pace near the entrance gate. Logan and Hayes were positioned nearby, their cameras and microphones calibrated to capture every heartbeat of the upcoming encounter. When Webb's convoy arrived, 3 black SUVs with a full security detail, the tension reached a breaking point. Webb stepped out, his presence commanding even in the middle of a graveyard. Amanda ran to him, playing the part of the terrified daughter perfectly. She told him that people had threatened her, showing her horrifying things and demanding a confession. Webb tried to soothe her, dismissing the evidence as propaganda and urging her to come with him to a secure location. But Amanda wouldn't move. She stood her ground, her voice trembling but clear, as she asked him point-blank if he had ordered those men killed. She pushed him, questioning the signatures and the recordings, forcing him to defend his actions. Under the pressure of his daughter's scrutiny, Webb's carefully constructed mask began to slip. He didn't see the cameras hidden in the trees or the microphones picking up his every word. He saw only his daughter, the one person whose opinion he actually cared about, challenging his legacy. He began to justify himself, speaking of difficult choices and national security. He argued that the SEALs had become a liability, that they were naive men who didn't understand how the world truly worked. He called himself a patriot and Ethan Donovan a weakling who couldn't see the bigger picture. As the confession poured out of him, a confession of murder, treason, and absolute corruption, Claire felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. It was all being recorded. Every word was being broadcast to a secure server that Sarah Chen and a dozen international news outlets would have access to within minutes. Webb, in his arrogance, thought he was winning an argument with his daughter. In reality, he was signing his own death warrant. He told Amanda that power required sacrifice and that she would one day understand why he had to do what he did. But Amanda's reaction wasn't what he expected. She didn't offer him understanding or forgiveness. She looked at him with a mixture of horror and disgust, telling him that he wasn't a hero or a patriot. He was a monster who had used his country to enrich himself. When Webb realized the depth of her betrayal, his expression shifted from paternal concern to cold, calculated malice. He reached for his phone, likely to call in his security team to silence everyone present, but it was too late. The light of a dozen flashlights suddenly cut through the darkness from the perimeter of the cemetery. The authorities weren't the ones who arrived first. It was the media and a contingent of military police that Sarah Chen had quietly mobilized using the live feed as probable cause. Webb stood frozen, the realization of his downfall finally sinking in. He looked around at the headstones of the men who had died for the country he had betrayed, and for the first time in his life he looked small. Claire stepped out from the shadows, locking eyes with the man who had destroyed her family. She didn't need to say a word. The truth was finally out, echoing through the silent rows of the dead, and the long shadow of Operation Black Tide was finally starting to recede. As the police moved in to take Webb into custody, Amanda stood alone by her father's side, her world forever changed. Claire walked over to her father's grave, the cold marble smooth under her hand. She had finished what he started. She had followed the breadcrumbs through the darkness and come out the other side. Logan appeared beside her, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder in a rare gesture of comfort. The war wasn't over. There would be trials, hearings, and a lifetime of fallout, but for tonight there was peace. The ghosts of the 5 SEALs could finally rest, their honor restored and their killer brought to justice in the very place where heroes were remembered. Claire looked up at the stars, the desert air of her memory replaced by the humid night of Virginia. She thought of her father, of the lessons he'd taught her and the man he'd been. He had known this day would come, and he had trusted her to see it through. As the sirens faded in the distance, and the first light of a new dawn began to creep over the horizon, Claire finally let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 10 years. The fire she had started had indeed burned everything down, but from the ashes, something like justice had finally begun to grow. The days following the arrest were a whirlwind of activity that felt surreal to Claire. She and Logan moved from one secure location to another, as the evidence from Project Prometheus began to permeate every level of the government. The public outcry was unlike anything the country had seen in decades. The image of the Secretary of Defense being led away in handcuffs from Arlington National Cemetery became an overnight icon of fallen power. Sarah Chen worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring that the legal proceedings were handled by prosecutors who couldn't be bought or intimidated. The USB drive had been the key, but the live confession had been the nail in the coffin. Claire found herself sitting in a sterile briefing room at a DIA safe house, watching a news broadcast. They were showing photos of the 5 SEALs, her father, Chen, Martinez, and the others. For the first time, they weren't being discussed as casualties of a failed mission, but as victims of a high-level execution. The narrative had shifted, and the truth was finally being told. Logan walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been a week ago. He sat down across from her, his gaze fixed on the television screen. He noted that the world was finally paying attention, but he also warned that the people who benefited from Webb's schemes wouldn't just disappear. There were still contractors, lobbyists, and politicians who were now in the crosshairs, and they would be dangerous. Claire knew he was right. The exposure of Project Prometheus had sent shockwaves through the global defense industry. Arrest warrants were being issued across 3 continents. It was a massive victory, but the personal cost remained high. She thought about Amanda Webb, who had essentially sacrificed her own father to do the right thing. Amanda had disappeared from the public eye, seeking refuge in an undisclosed location. Claire felt a strange kinship with her. Both of them were daughters of powerful men, and both had been forced to dismantle their father's legacies to find the truth. A few weeks later, a private memorial service was held for the families of the Black Tide team. It wasn't the large, state-sponsored event that Webb would have orchestrated for optics. It was small, quiet, and deeply personal. Claire stood with Martinez's widow, a woman who had been through unimaginable hell but who now held her daughter with a newfound sense of closure. They didn't need many words. The shared grief was a language of its own. When the service ended, Claire walked back to where Logan was waiting by the car. He asked her what she was going to do now. The mission was over, the files were public, and the guilty were behind bars. Claire looked out at the rolling hills of the countryside, the weight of the last few years finally starting to lift. She told him she was going back to Montana, back to the cabin where it all began. She wanted to sit on the porch, listen to the wind in the pines, and remember her father not as a commander or a victim, but as a man who loved the mountains and his daughter. Logan nodded, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. He told her that if she ever found another floorboard that needed prying up, she knew where to find him. As she drove away, the journal sat on the passenger seat, its pages now a closed chapter of history. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a decade, Clare Donovan wasn't running toward a ghost. She was driving toward her own life, a life built on the foundation of the truth her father had died to protect. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows over the landscape, and as the stars began to appear one by one, the world felt a little bit brighter, and the shadows a little less cold. The journey home to Montana felt like a transition through different worlds. The bustling, paranoid energy of the East Coast gradually gave way to the sprawling plains of the Midwest, and eventually the rugged, snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. Each mile was a layer of armor she felt she could finally shed. By the time she reached the gravel road that led to her father's cabin, the air was thin and pure, smelling of pine resin and cold earth. The cabin stood exactly as she had left it, a humble structure of timber and stone that seemed to belong to the mountains themselves. Inside, the silence was no longer heavy with secrets. It was peaceful. She spent her first few days simply being still. She chopped wood, hauled water from the spring, and let the rhythm of the wilderness settle her soul. She often found herself sitting on the porch at dusk, the very spot where her father used to sit with his coffee, looking out over the valley. She could almost feel his presence there, not as a haunting, but as a quiet approval. The mission was truly finished. One evening, a small package arrived at the local post office in town. It was from Logan. Inside was a single silver challenge coin, the insignia of her father's unit, along with a short, handwritten note. It said that some things were worth remembering, even the parts that hurt. Claire held the coin in her hand, feeling the weight of the metal and the history it represented. She placed it on the mantel next to a photograph of her father in his dress blues, smiling a rare, genuine smile. In the months that followed, the trial of Marcus Webb became a landmark event in American legal history. The testimony of Sarah Chen and the evidence provided by Claire and Logan dismantled a decades-old system of corruption. Webb was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fall from grace that served as a stark warning to those who believed they were above the law. Project Prometheus was dismantled, its assets seized, and its illegal programs permanently shuttered. But for Claire, the headlines were just background noise to the life she was rebuilding. She began to volunteer with organizations that supported the families of fallen service members, using her experience to help others navigate the complex web of grief and bureaucracy. She found that in helping them, she was continuing her father's true legacy, not the one of war and secrets, but the one of service and honor. The journal remained on her bookshelf, a testament to the man who had seen the darkness coming and made sure his daughter was ready to face it. Every now and then, she would open it to that final page, but she no longer felt the cold sting of the words. Instead, she saw them for what they were, an act of love from a father who wanted his daughter to live in a world where the truth actually mattered. As the first snow of winter began to fall, dusting the pines in white, Claire stood on her porch and looked out at the vast, silent horizon. The world was still a complicated, often dangerous place, but she knew she could handle whatever came next. She had faced the highest powers in the land and come out standing. She was Clare Donovan, and she was no longer living in her father's shadow. She was walking in his light, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ghosts were gone, the mission was complete, and the mountains were home. The weight of the silence in the Arlington National Cemetery was suffocating, broken only by the distant, rhythmic hum of traffic from the city beyond its gates. Marcus Webb stood with the posture of a man who owned the very air he breathed, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the weathered granite of the monuments surrounding them. He didn't look like a murderer. He looked like a statesman, a pillar of the establishment. When he spoke, his voice was devoid of guilt, carrying the cold, calculated resonance of a man who had long ago traded his soul for a seat at the table of power. He looked at Amanda, his own flesh and blood, and spoke of her father's death as if it were a line item in a budget. He admitted that Ethan Donovan's naivety would have gotten thousands of Americans killed, and with a chilling lack of hesitation, he confirmed he had ordered the team eliminated. He would do it again tomorrow, he said, if the situation required it. It was the ultimate betrayal, delivered with the casual indifference of a man who believed he was untouchable. Clare Donovan could no longer remain a ghost in the shadows. The rage that had fueled her for a decade, a hot, searing coal in the center of her chest, finally boiled over. She stepped out from behind the massive stone monument where she had been crouching, her movements fluid and deliberate. She walked directly toward Webb and Amanda, her boots crunching on the manicured grass. Webb's security detail, men trained to react to threats with lethal precision, immediately pivoted. Their movements were a blur of tactical efficiency as they drew their weapons. Within a heartbeat, the crimson dots of laser sights appeared on Claire's chest, dancing over her heart like tiny, lethal insects. She didn't flinch. She didn't even slow down. "Hold your fire," Webb ordered, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He watched Claire approach, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. It was a look of recognition, almost of admiration. "Miss Donovan," he said, his tone dripping with a patronizing warmth that made Claire's skin crawl. "I should have known you were behind this. Using my daughter to get to me. Very clever. It's very much your father's style." Claire stopped 10 feet away, her gaze locked onto his with an intensity that would have withered a lesser man. "My father's style was trusting the system," she countered, her voice low and steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "He believed in following the rules. He believed the institutions he served were as honorable as he was. Look where that got him." Webb's smile didn't fade. It merely sharpened. "It got him exactly what he deserved," he replied. "In this world, those who cannot see the larger picture are a liability. Your father was a beautiful soul, Claire, but he was a dangerous man because he lacked the stomach for the reality of governance." "You just confessed to ordering his murder," Claire said, her voice rising slightly. "You admitted it on camera with your own daughter as a witness. Your career is over, Marcus. The walls are closing in." Webb let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "You think this changes anything?" he asked, tilting his head. "So what if I admitted it privately? No court in this country will allow secret recordings as evidence. Any lawyer worth their retainer will have them thrown out before the preliminary hearing, and even if they didn't, you obtained classified information through illegal means. You broke into secure facilities, you compromised national security. That makes you the criminal in the eyes of the law, not me. I am the Secretary of Defense. I am the law. The court of public opinion doesn't need legal admissibility," Claire replied, her eyes flicking to the phone in Amanda's hand. "They don't care about the chain of evidence. They just need the truth." Webb took a step toward her, his presence expansive and intimidating. "The truth is what I tell them it is," he hissed. "By tomorrow morning, I'll have the narrative under control. I'll spin this as a desperate, grieving daughter being manipulated by an unstable woman obsessed with her dead father. I'll paint you as mentally ill, a dangerous threat to the state, a woman who has lost her grip on reality, and people will believe me. They'll believe me because I'm the man who keeps them safe at night, and you're nobody. You're a ghost, Claire, and ghosts don't win trials." Amanda, who had been standing frozen in a state of shock, suddenly stepped between them. "Stop," she commanded, her voice trembling but clear. "Both of you just stop." She turned to face her father, searching his eyes for some glimmer of the man who had tucked her into bed and told her stories of heroes. "How did you become this?" she asked, the heartbreak in her voice palpable. "How did you turn into someone who murders people and justifies it as patriotism? When did the man I loved become a monster who sees people as nothing more than obstacles?" "I didn't turn into anything," Amanda, Webb said, his voice softening slightly as he looked at his daughter, though his eyes remained as cold as flint. "I simply accepted reality. The world is a violent, unforgiving place. America stays on top by being more violent and more decisive than everyone else. That requires people who are willing to make the hard choices, the choices that keep the lights on and the borders secure. Your mother understood that. Your grandfather understood that. I thought you did too. I thought I raised a woman who understood the price of freedom. I understand that you're a monster," Amanda whispered, the words hitting Webb like a physical blow. Webb's expression went instantly cold, the last vestige of parental affection vanishing. "If that's how you feel, then you've made your choice," he said. "But understand something, Amanda. You release those recordings and you destroy our entire family. You destroy your career, your reputation, your future. You will have nothing. Is that really what you want? To burn your entire life down for a man who has been dead for 10 years. I want my father to be the man I thought he was, Amanda said, tears finally spilling over. But since that's impossible, I'll settle for him being held accountable. I'll settle for the truth, no matter what it costs me. Webb's jaw tightened. He turned to his security team, his voice snapping with authority. Detain them both. Charge Donovan with espionage and domestic terrorism. Charge my daughter with aiding and abetting a fugitive. We'll sort the details out at the Pentagon. The security contractors, heavy-set men with dead eyes and professional postures, began to move forward. They were closing the distance, their hands moving toward their tactical gear. Claire tensed, her muscles coiling. She knew she couldn't take them all, but she was damn sure going to take as many as she could before they went down. This was about to get violent, and in the hallowed silence of the cemetery, the air felt thick with the impending discharge of firearms. Then, Logan and Hayes appeared. They didn't come from the road. They materialized from the shadows of the surrounding trees and monuments, their weapons raised and steady. From other positions around the cemetery, 4 more Navy SEALs emerged, moving with the silent, predatory grace that only years of elite combat training could produce. They formed a perimeter, their rifles leveled at Webb's security detail. "Nobody's detaining anyone," Logan said, his voice a low growl that carried across the grass. "Your people are outnumbered, Secretary. They're outgunned. And more importantly, about 30 million people just watched you confess to treason on a live stream." Webb's face went a sickly shade of gray. The confidence that had seemed so absolute only moments ago began to fracture. "What?" he stammered, his eyes darting between the SEALs. "What are you talking about?" Claire held up her phone, the screen glowing in the dim light. "Everything," she said, her voice ringing with a sense of triumph. "Your confession, your threats, your admission that you ordered my father killed. It's all streaming live. It has been since the moment Amanda called you. You wanted to control the narrative, Marcus. You're too late. The truth isn't coming. It's already out there. It's viral. It's the only thing the world is talking about right now." Webb stared at the phone, his breath coming in shallow hitches. He looked at the viewer count, which was climbing into the millions, the numbers ticking upward with dizzying speed. He saw the comments flooding in outrage, calls for justice, demands for his arrest. People from all over the world were watching his downfall in real time. The digital mob had arrived, and there was no lawyer in the world who could suppress their verdict. "You can't do this," he whispered, the realization of his ruin finally sinking in. "I just did exactly what my father would have wanted," Claire said. "I exposed the truth. I made you face it. I made sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. You're not a patriot, Marcus. You're just a murderer in an expensive suit." Webb's own phone started ringing in his pocket. Then it rang again. Within seconds, it was vibrating incessantly, exploding with calls from the Pentagon, the White House, Congress, and every major media outlet in the country. Everyone was demanding answers. The untouchable man was suddenly the most hunted man in Washington. "This is illegal," Webb shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You violated my privacy. You recorded me without consent. You obtained classified materials through criminal means. This won't hold up. And you murdered 5 American heroes," Claire countered, her voice cold and unyielding. "I think my crimes are a little less severe than yours. The world will agree." Webb looked at Amanda, his eyes wide with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. "You knew," he said. "You were part of this. My own daughter betrayed me." Amanda didn't flinch. "You stopped being my father the moment you put power over people," she said. "You put your ego over honor, over duty, over everything that actually matters. You made your choice a long time ago. This is just the consequence." Webb's security team was already backing away. They were professionals, and they knew how to read a battlefield. They had seen the live stream on their own devices. They knew their boss was finished, and they knew that staying loyal to him now meant going down with a sinking ship. They began holstering their weapons, their hands raised in a gesture of neutrality as they drifted back toward their vehicles. "You're all under arrest." Webb shouted at them, his voice shrill and panicked. "I'm ordering you to detain these people. That is a direct order from the Secretary of Defense." Nobody moved. The silence that followed his command was the loudest sound Claire had ever heard. It was the sound of a man losing everything. Driven by a sudden, frantic impulse, Webb reached into his jacket and pulled his own weapon, a small, sleek pistol. He pointed it directly at Claire, his hand shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. "You destroyed everything," he spat. "My career, my legacy, my family. Everything I built for 40 years gone in a single afternoon. For what? For your father's memory, he was a fool, Claire. He was going to die anyway. I just made it happen faster. I saved the country from his weakness. Claire didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her eyes fixed on the barrel of the gun. Pull that trigger, Marcus, she challenged him. Pull it and you prove everything I've said about you. Murder me on camera in front of millions of witnesses right here in the middle of Arlington. Go ahead. Show the world what a patriot looks like. Show them how you solve your problems. Webb's hand shook violently. The gun wavered, the barrel dipping and rising as he struggled with the weight of the moment. The power he had wielded so casually for decades was now a leaden weight, dragging him down into the dirt. Then Amanda stepped in front of Claire. She blocked the shot, her body a shield between the gun and her father's victim. If you're going to shoot someone, shoot me, she said, her voice devoid of fear. I'm the one who betrayed you. I'm the one who helped expose you. I'm the one who ensured you'll never hold power again. So if you're really the monster she says you are, prove it. Kill your own daughter. Webb stared at Amanda. He looked at the daughter he had raised, the girl he had protected, the woman he claimed to love. The monster within him flickered, momentarily eclipsed by the ghost of the father he used to be. Slowly, agonizingly, the gun lowered. His arm dropped to his side, the weapon dangling uselessly from his fingers. I was trying to keep you safe, Webb whispered, his voice broken. Everything I did, every choice I made, it was to ensure you'd grow up in a secure world. A world where America was strong. A world where you were protected from the wolves. You weren't protecting me, Amanda said, her voice heavy with pity. You were protecting yourself. You were protecting your secrets and your power. You sacrificed better men than you'll ever be just to maintain the illusion of control. You didn't build a secure world, Dad. You built a prison and you just got locked inside of it. In the distance, the first sirens erupted. The sound grew louder, a cacophony of wailing electronics as multiple vehicles raced toward the cemetery. FBI tactical units, military police, federal marshals, everyone was responding to the live stream. The entire apparatus of the state he had once commanded was now converging to tear him down. Webb looked around at his security team abandoning him, at Claire standing defiant in the fading light, at his daughter's face full of disgust and heartbreak. He looked at the phone that was still broadcasting his downfall to the world, the comments section a blur of global condemnation. I served this country for 40 years, he said quietly, almost to himself. You served yourself, Claire replied, stepping out from behind Amanda. My father served his country. He died for it for real. He didn't die for profit, and he didn't die for power. He died for the men beside him and for the principles he believed in. That's the difference between a soldier and a traitor, Marcus. You've spent 40 years confusing the two. The first police vehicles screeched to a halt, their tires churning up the gravel. Officers poured out with weapons drawn, their movements practiced and urgent. FBI agents moved in tactical formation, their vests clearly marked. They swarmed the area, their shouts echoing through the cemetery. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, treason, weapons trafficking, and multiple violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, a lead agent shouted. Webb dropped his gun onto the grass. He raised his hands slowly, the surrender of a man who had finally run out of moves. But even as the agents closed in, his eyes never left Claire's. A cruel, twisted light flickered in his gaze, one last attempt to inflict pain. Your father begged at the end, he said, his voice carrying a sudden, venomous clarity. Did you know that? He begged me to spare him. He promised he'd keep quiet. He promised he'd forget everything if I just let him live. He wasn't the hero you think he was, Claire. He was a coward who died crying for mercy. Claire felt tears burning behind her eyes, a sharp, stinging pain in her throat. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? Webb sneered as the agents grabbed his arms. He cried, Claire, he talked about you. He talked about missing watching you grow up, about all the things he'd never get to teach you. He died afraid and broken, just like you'll die someday. Afraid, broken, and forgotten. Claire stepped forward, her hands clenching into fists. The FBI agents moved to stop her, sensing the volatility of the moment, but Logan stepped in and held them back. He knew she needed this. He let her move forward until she was inches from Webb's face, close enough to smell the faint scent of his expensive cologne, close enough to see the deep-seated hate in his eyes. My father didn't break, Claire said, her voice vibrating with a conviction that came from the very core of her being. He never broke. You can lie about his last moments all you want, Marcus. You can try to poison my memory of him to save your own pathetic ego. But I know who he was. I know what he stood for. And I know that even in death he won. He won because he raised a daughter who finished what he started. He won because he raised a daughter who exposed you and made sure his sacrifice mattered. You're the one who's broken, Marcus. You're the one who's going to be forgotten." Webb smiled coldly, a mask of defiance even as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. "You think this ends with me?" he asked. "I'm just one man. The system I was part of has hundreds of people, thousands, all doing exactly what I did. They're making the same choices, protecting the same interests, ensuring the machine keeps turning. You exposed me, but you didn't change the world. Tomorrow, someone else will be sitting in my office making the same decisions I made. And there's nothing a girl from Montana can do about it." "Maybe," Claire said, watching as they began to lead him away. "But at least now everyone knows the truth. At least my father's name is cleared. And at least you'll spend the rest of your life in a concrete box, knowing that a woman you underestimated destroyed everything you built." The FBI agents moved Webb toward a waiting federal vehicle. He looked back at Amanda one final time, his expression momentarily unreadable. "I'm sorry for everything," he said, but the words felt hollow, like a script he was reading for an audience that no longer cared. Amanda turned away without answering. She watched the taillights of the federal vehicles disappear into the night, leaving behind a silence that was far more profound than the one that had preceded the confrontation. Claire stood watching until the last of the convoy had cleared the gates. Then, as if the strings holding her upright had been suddenly cut, her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the grass beside her father's grave, her hands clutching the cool earth. The tears she had been holding back for 10 years finally came, a torrential downpour of grief, anger, and relief. It all crashed over her at once, the weight of the hunt, the ghost she had chased, and the blood she had spilled. Logan knelt beside her, his presence a steadying anchor in the storm. He didn't speak, he didn't offer platitudes or comfort. He just stayed close, a silent witness to her release. Amanda approached slowly, her own face etched with a weariness that looked like it would last a lifetime. "I'm sorry for everything he did," Amanda said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry for what my family took from yours. It's a debt that can never be repaid." Claire looked up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "You helped," she said. "That's what matters. You chose the truth over loyalty to a lie. That took more courage than most people possess." "It took you showing me who my father really was," Amanda replied. "I spent my whole life believing in a fairy tale. Now I have to figure out how to live in the real world." "Welcome to the club," Claire said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. They sat together in the darkness of the cemetery, two daughters destroyed by powerful, complicated fathers. They were two women trying to make sense of a world that had been shattered by violence and secrets. The monuments around them seemed to watch in silence, the graves of the fallen a testament to the cost of the truths they had just uncovered. Hayes interrupted the moment quietly. "The FBI wants statements," he said, his voice professional but tinged with exhaustion. "The media is already camping out at the gates. The Pentagon wants to know exactly what else is on those servers. We have a long night ahead of us." "They can wait," Claire said, her hand pressing against the cold marble of her father's headstone. "Right now I need a minute, just 1 minute with him." Everyone stepped back, giving her the space she required. Claire leaned her forehead against the stone, the name Ethan Donovan etched deep into the rock. "I did it, Dad," she whispered. "Just like you wanted. I finished what you started. I made them pay. I made sure everyone knows what really happened that night in the desert." The stone was silent, cold, and unresponsive, but deep in her chest, Claire felt a shift. The crushing weight she had been carrying for a decade, the burden of unanswered questions and unfinished business, was finally lifting. It wasn't gone, and it would never fully disappear, but it was becoming manageable. It was a scar now rather than an open wound. "I'm going to be okay," she whispered. "Eventually. I think you knew I would be. That's why you trained me, not just to fight, but to survive, to keep going even when the world is trying to break you. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." She stood slowly, brushing the grass from her knees. She turned to face Logan, Hayes, and the others who had risked their lives and their careers to help her. "What happens now?" Logan asked, his eyes searching hers. "Now we give our statements," Claire said, her voice regaining its strength. "We cooperate with the investigations. We make sure Webb doesn't find some back door out of this. And then I'm going back to Montana. I'm going to try to figure out who I am when I'm not hunting ghosts." "You'll always have a place with us," Hayes said. "Your father was our brother. That makes you family. We look out for our own." Claire nodded, feeling the warmth of their support. "I know, thank you, for believing me when nobody else would, for helping me finish this." Amanda spoke up, her voice sounding small in the vastness of the cemetery. "What about me? What happens to me after the cameras go away?" Claire looked at her, seeing the long road of reconstruction ahead of the younger woman. "You'll rebuild," she said. "You'll find a new career, a new identity, something that isn't defined by your father's legacy. It won't be easy, and there will be days when you want to give up, but it's possible." "I've been doing it for 10 years. Will it ever stop hurting?" Amanda asked. "No," Claire admitted, "but you learn to live with the pain. You learn to let it make you stronger instead of letting it break you. Your father taught you that lesson the hard way. Now you get to decide what to do with the strength you've found." The FBI agents approached again, more insistent this time. The bureaucracy of justice was beginning its slow, inevitable grind. Claire spent the next 6 hours in a windowless room at FBI headquarters, answering questions, handing over encrypted files, and detailing the labyrinthine conspiracy she had unraveled. She explained how she had tracked the money, how she had identified the contractors, and how she had convinced Amanda to turn against her own father. By the time dawn broke over Washington, D.C., Claire was exhausted, her mind a blur of dates, names, and tactical maneuvers. She stood outside the headquarters watching the city wake up. The news of Webb's arrest was everywhere. Every digital billboard, every smartphone, every news ticker was flashing the story. Her phone, which she had finally turned back on, was a constant vibration of notifications. Reporters, book publishers, producers, everyone wanted a piece of the story. Everyone wanted to profit from the wreckage of her life. She turned the phone off again and sat on a nearby bench, watching the morning traffic. Logan found her there a few minutes later, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "You're famous," he said, handing her a cup. "Every news outlet in the Western world is calling you a hero." "I don't want to be a hero," Claire said, staring at the steam rising from the coffee. "I just want my father back. Since I can't have that, I just want to go home. I want the quiet." "Fair enough," Logan said, sitting down beside her. "When are you leaving?" "Tomorrow," Claire said, "or the day after. Once I'm sure the handcuffs on Webb are tight enough that he can't buy his way out." "They're tight," Logan assured her. "Between the live stream and the documents you recovered, there's no way out for him. He's the sacrificial lamb the system is going to offer up to save itself. He's done." Claire nodded slowly. "Good, that's more than I hoped for when I started this." Logan looked at her, his expression uncharacteristically soft. "Your father would be proud, Claire, you know that, right? Everything you did, everything you sacrificed to get here. He'd be incredibly proud." "Would he?" Claire asked. "Or would he wish I'd just lived a normal life? Would he wish I'd found happiness instead of spending my 20s in the dark corners of the world hunting killers?" "Your father was a lot of things," Logan said, "but he wasn't a hypocrite. He taught you to fight for what's right. He taught you that the truth is worth the cost. You did exactly what he trained you to do, just on a much larger scale than he ever imagined." "Yeah, he'd be proud. He'd be amazed." They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the pavement. Claire thought about the little girl who had learned to shoot in the middle of Montana blizzards. She thought about the woman who had dropped 5 elite operators in 63 seconds. She thought about the cost of justice and the weight of the legacy she now carried. "I need to ask you something," Claire said. "When you served with him, what was he really like? Not the legend, not the stories, just the man." Logan took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes reflecting the memories of a dozen battlefields. He was quiet, he said eventually. He mostly kept to himself. But when things got bad, when everyone was scared, when the mission was falling apart and we were ready to quit, he'd get this look in his eyes. It was this absolute, unshakable certainty that we were going to make it, that we were going to win, and somehow that confidence would spread. He made everyone around him better. He made everyone braver. He had this way of making you believe that doing the right thing was always worth it, no matter how high the price was. "Sounds like him," Claire whispered. "You're like that too," Logan added. "You have that same certainty, that same refusal to quit even when the odds are impossible. I think it's genetic. It runs in the Donovan blood." Claire smiled, her first real smile in years. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe it's just stubbornness disguised as courage." "Same thing in my experience," Logan replied. Hayes approached them, his face grim as he checked his own phone. "The fallout is starting," he said. "The Pentagon is calling an emergency session. Congress is already scheduling hearings. The president is going to address the nation tonight. This is getting much bigger than just Webb." "How much bigger?" Claire asked. "They're talking about a full investigation into the entire defense contracting system," Hayes said. "Every black budget program, every classified operation from the last 20 years. Your father's death is triggering the biggest military scandal in American history. Everything is going to be scrutinized." "Good," Claire said. "Burn it all down. Make them rebuild it the right way this time." That's going to make you some very powerful enemies, Logan warned. People who were happy with the way things were. People who don't want the light shining on their business. I know, Claire said, but my father made those same enemies and they killed him for it. At least this time the world is watching. It's harder to make someone disappear when millions of people are paying attention. Amanda appeared looking like she hadn't slept in days. The FBI finally let me go, she said. My lawyer is advising me to leave the country for a while. He thinks there might be people loyal to my father who will try to retaliate. Will you go? Claire asked. I don't know, Amanda admitted. Part of me wants to run and hide, to pretend that none of this ever happened. But another part of me thinks I should stay. I should face the consequences. I should help the investigations. I know where the bodies are buried in the contracting world. I could help expose more of them. That's a dangerous path, Claire said. So was helping you, Amanda countered. I did it anyway. Maybe that's my inheritance. Not his crimes, but his willingness to make the hard choices. I'll just make the right ones this time. Claire stood up and extended her hand. Whatever you decide, Amanda, thank you for choosing the truth, for having more courage than your father ever did. Amanda shook her hand firmly. I'm sorry we had to meet like this, she said. I'm sorry our father's war became ours. Me too, Claire agreed. They stood together for a moment, two women bound by a shared tragedy that had reshaped the landscape of American power. Then Amanda walked away toward her lawyer and an uncertain future. Claire turned to Logan. I need one more thing before I leave D.C., she said. Name it. Take me back to Coronado, Claire said. Take me back to the shooting range where this all started. I want to see where he trained. I want to feel close to him one more time before I go back to Montana. They drove across the country, a 3-day journey of endless highways, roadside diners, and quiet conversations. Claire watched the American landscape pass by her window, the flat plains of the Midwest, the rugged peaks of the Rockies, and she thought about her father making the same drive decades ago. He had been heading toward a destiny that would eventually claim his life, and now she was heading toward a future he had helped her build. When they reached Coronado, the Naval Special Warfare Training Center looked exactly as it had before. The same steel doors, the same smell of salt air and gunpowder. Logan led her inside to the shooting range, the place where she had first revealed her skills by dropping 5 SEALs in 63 seconds. The range was quiet and empty. The smell of gun oil and concrete hit Claire with a wave of nostalgia, reminding her of her father's workshop back in Montana. It reminded her of cold mornings spent learning to field strip weapons before she was old enough to drive. Logan watched her from the doorway. Your father stood right where you're standing 20 years ago, he said. It was his first day as an instructor. I was here. I watched him qualify. He put 30 rounds through the same hole at 50 yards. I'd never seen anything like it. Until me, Claire whispered. Until you, Logan agreed. You shoot just like him. You move like him, you think like him. It's almost supernatural. Claire walked to the firing line, her fingers trailing along the worn wooden bench where her father had taught countless operators the difference between shooting and survival. Did he ever talk about me? She asked. When you were overseas? All the time, Logan said, walking up to join her. He showed us pictures. He told stories about teaching you to track deer, about how you were out shooting grown men when you were only 12. He was so proud of you, Claire. It actually got a little annoying after a while. Claire smiled through the tears that were starting to form. I miss him every single day, she said. Even after everything, even after the justice and the truth, I just miss my dad. I know, Logan said softly. We all do. The range doors opened and Hayes entered, followed by 3 other SEALs. These were men who had served with Ethan Donovan, men who had seen him at his best and his worst. They were the brothers he had chosen. We heard you were in town, Hayes said, his voice carrying a deep respect. We wanted to pay our respects, if that's okay. Claire nodded, her heart full. It's more than okay. They gathered around the firing line, 7 warriors united by memory and loss. For a long time, nobody spoke. They just stood together in the silence that follows violence and grief. It was a moment of profound communion, a final salute to a man who had left an indelible mark on all of them. Finally, a young SEAL named Torres, who had joined the teams long after Ethan's death, spoke up. I never met Commander Donovan, he said, but I've heard the stories. The impossible shots, the missions that shouldn't have succeeded. Guys talk about him like he was something more than human. He was human, Claire said, her voice clear. Very human. He bled, he got scared, and he made mistakes. But he also believed that honor wasn't negotiable. He believed that some truths were worth dying for. That's what made him different. Not some superhuman ability, just human courage taken to its absolute limit. Torres nodded. "I'm sorry about Martinez," he said, referring to the SEAL who had died during the conspiracy's climax. "He talked about you. He said you were the real deal. He said your father would have been proud of the warrior you became." Claire's throat tightened. "Martinez died because of me," she said, "because I dragged him into my fight. Martinez died because Marcus Webb ordered it." Logan corrected her firmly. "Don't you dare carry that guilt, Claire. It belongs to the people who pulled the trigger, not the people who were trying to stop the murders." "Does it?" Claire asked, "because I keep thinking about his family. His wife, his daughter, they're going to grow up without him just like I did." Hayes stepped forward. "No," he said, "it's on the system that protected a man like Webb. It's on the people who looked the other way while good men were betrayed." Martinez knew the risks. He chose to help because it was the right thing to do. You honor that choice by finishing what he helped start. "I've already finished it," Claire said. "Webb is in prison. The conspiracy is exposed. My father's name is clear. Webb is in prison," Hayes agreed. "But the system that enabled him is still very much intact. There are dozens more like him, hundreds even, still operating in the shadows. Your father's death revealed one conspiracy, but you have the platform now to expose the whole corrupt structure. You have the evidence, and you have the world's attention." Claire shook her head. "I'm not a crusader," she said. "I'm just a daughter who wanted justice for her father. That's done. Now I need to go home. I need to try to find a life that doesn't involve a rifle." "Is that what your father would want?" Torres asked. "For you to walk away when there's still work to do?" "My father is dead," Claire said, her voice sharp. "He doesn't get a vote anymore." Logan put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Maybe not," he said. "But he spent 12 years training you for something bigger than just revenge. He taught you everything: how to fight, how to survive, how to investigate, how to see the world for what it really is. That's not the skill set you give to someone who's just going to live a quiet life in the mountains. He was preparing you to carry on his work. His work got him killed," Claire whispered. "His work mattered," Logan said. "It still matters. And right now, you're the only one who can continue it. You're the only one the public trusts. You're the only one with the skills to navigate the darkness." Claire looked at the men surrounding her. She saw the expectation in their eyes, the hope that the battle hadn't ended with a single arrest. She looked at the firing line where her father had stood, and she realized that the road didn't end here. The justice she had found for Ethan Donovan was just the first step in a much longer journey. She took a deep breath, the scent of the range filling her lungs. She thought about the Montana mountains, the quiet cabin, and the life she had dreamed of returning to. Then she thought about the men like Webb who were still out there, the men who sacrificed lives for profit and called it patriotism. She looked at Logan, a new fire igniting in her eyes. "You're right," she said. "He didn't train me to walk away. He trained me to finish the job." Logan nodded, a grim smile of satisfaction on his face. "So what's the first move?" Claire looked at the targets at the far end of the range. "The first move is to make sure Webb doesn't have any friends left to help him. Then we go after the people who signed the checks. We go after the ones who thought they could buy their way out of the truth." The SEALs around her straightened their postures, a silent acknowledgement of the new mission. The war wasn't over, it was just changing fronts. Clare Donovan, the girl who had spent a decade hunting ghosts, was now the woman who would hunt the monsters still hiding in the light. As she walked out of the range and into the bright California sun, Claire felt the presence of her father one last time. It wasn't a haunting and it wasn't a burden. It was a legacy. She knew who she was now. She was her father's daughter, and she had a lot of work left to do. The silence of the range behind her felt like a benediction, a final sign-off from the man who had taught her everything. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. And this time, she wasn't alone. Claire's boots crunched over the spent brass casings that littered the concrete floor like a carpet of fallen gold. The smell of cordite and burnt ozone hung heavy in the stagnant air of the indoor range, a scent that had been the backdrop of her life for as long as she could remember. She walked to the far end of the firing line, her movements mechanical and weary. She stopped at the edge of the lane and stared out at the paper targets hanging in the distance, their silhouettes shredded and mocking. Her father had stood in this exact spot thousands of times. He had taught her to see past the paper, past the ink, and into the intent behind the shot. He always told her that a weapon was just a tool, but the trigger pull was a choice. It was a commitment to a set of consequences that could never be undone. For 10 years, Claire had lived by that philosophy, hunting the shadows that had swallowed her father's life. But now that the primary target was behind bars, The silence was louder than the gunfire had ever been. Her phone, which she had switched back on during the long, hollow drive to the coast, began to vibrate against her hip. It wasn't just a single notification. It was a rhythmic, relentless buzzing that signaled a digital storm. News outlets were clamoring for an exclusive, government investigators were demanding her presence in closed-door hearings, and advocacy groups saw her as the new face of military reform. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who had brought down a Secretary of Defense. They wanted her to speak, to testify, to lead a movement she had never asked to join. But amidst the deluge of requests, one message held a weight that made the others feel like static. It was from Deputy Director Sarah Chen. The text was brief but devastating. It stated that while her father had exposed one conspiracy, Chen had been tracking 17 more. People were selling secrets to the highest bidder, ordering extrajudicial executions, and profiting from the blood of soldiers while the men and women on the ground died for lies. Chen's message ended with a haunting plea. She couldn't touch them alone, but together they could burn the entire structure down. Her father had started the fight, and Chen wanted Claire to help her finish it. Claire stared at the glowing screen until the words blurred into neon streaks. She thought of Robert Webb sitting in a sterile cell, stripped of his suits and his power, but still breathing. She thought of her father's lonely grave at Arlington, the grass barely beginning to take root over the man who had sacrificed everything for a truth that people were already trying to bury. Most of all, she thought of Martinez's widow, a woman she had watched try to explain to a sobbing little girl why her daddy wasn't coming home for Christmas. The injustice of it felt like a physical weight in her lungs, a pressure that made it hard to draw a full breath. No, Claire said out loud. The word was small, but it cut through the hum of the range's ventilation system. Logan, who had been leaning against a nearby pillar watching her with an unreadable expression, looked up. He asked her what she meant. Claire turned to him, her eyes hard and dry. She told him there would be no more crusades, no more hunts, and no more sacrificing every shred of her humanity for a version of justice that never seemed to stick. She had given a decade of her life to a ghost. She was done. She told him she was going to go home and live a life that didn't involve checking for tails or sleeping with a 9mm under her pillow. She wanted to let someone else save the world for a change. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Logan's expression, usually a mask of professional neutrality, hardened into something bordering on contempt. He reminded her that her father had died believing she was the only one capable of finishing what he started. He asked her if she was really prepared to betray that memory. Claire felt a flare of white-hot anger. She snapped back that her father was dead precisely because he couldn't let things go. He had kept pushing, kept asking the wrong questions to the wrong people, until someone decided he was a liability that needed to be erased. She refused to make that same mistake. Logan didn't flinch. He told her she was choosing comfort over honor, and Claire countered that she was choosing survival over martyrdom. She told him there was a profound difference between being a hero and being a victim of one's own obsession. The tension became a physical presence in the room. Logan and Hayes exchanged a look that spoke volumes of disappointment, while Torres shifted uncomfortably in the background, torn between his loyalty to the team and his understanding of Claire's exhaustion. Hayes finally spoke up, his voice low and gravelly. He told her they had been wrong about her. They had thought she was carved from the same stone as her father, but it turned out she was just someone who talked a good game until the stakes became too high and the work became too hard. Claire spun around, her face inches from his. She asked him if he thought the last 10 years had been easy. She had spent a third of her life hunting ghosts across 3 continents. She had been shot at, followed, and threatened. She had watched people die simply because they had the misfortune of helping her. And now that she had actually achieved the impossible, now that she had dragged the truth into the light, they wanted her to keep bleeding. They wanted her to fight until she ended up like her father, dead in some nameless warehouse with a bullet in her brain. Hayes didn't back down. He told her that at least her father had died for something that mattered. He asked her what she was planning to die for. Old age in a cabin where nobody would ever visit. Claire crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, invading Hayes's personal space with a ferocity that made Torres take a half step forward as if to intervene. She told them that none of them had the right to judge her. She had done exactly what she set out to do. She had gotten justice for her father and exposed the man who pulled the strings. To her, that was enough. But Hayes shook his head. He told her that from where he was standing, it looked like she had just settled a personal score. She had gotten revenge on one man, but was letting the system that created him continue to operate. To him, that wasn't justice. It was just a vendetta. Claire felt the sting of the truth in his words, but she pushed it down. She told him that maybe that was all she had left in her. Maybe she wasn't the hero they wanted her to be. Logan stepped between them, his voice calmer now, but no less heavy. He told her that nobody was asking her to be a hero. They were asking her to be the person her father had spent her entire childhood training her to be. They were asking for the woman who didn't walk away when there was still blood on the floor and work to be done. He warned her that if she walked away now, she would be dishonoring everything her father stood for, everything he had sacrificed to prepare her for this exact moment in history. Claire felt something deep inside her snap. It was 10 years of grief, anger, and sheer determination finally collapsing under the weight of a simple, desperate desire to just stop hurting. She wanted to rest. She wanted to be a person, not a weapon forged in the fire of her father's shadow. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the heavy steel exit doors. Logan called out to her, asking where she was going. Claire didn't look back. She told him she was going home to Montana, to the life she should have been living all along. When Logan tried to follow, she stopped him with a sharp command. She told them not to follow her, not to call her, and most importantly, not to ask her to be someone she couldn't be anymore. She pushed through the doors and into the blinding, uncaring California sunlight. She got into her rental car and started the engine, the air conditioning struggling against the midday heat. But as she pulled out of the lot, she didn't head toward the airport. She couldn't bring herself to go to the terminal and buy a ticket to a life that felt like a lie. Instead, she found herself driving toward the coast, toward the edge of the world where the Pacific Ocean met the sand. She needed a place where the expectations of dead men and disappointed soldiers couldn't reach her. She found a secluded stretch of beach and sat on the sand for hours, watching the rhythmic roll of the waves. She thought about her father, not the legend of the commander, but the man. She remembered the little girl who believed he was invincible, and she mourned the woman who had learned that he was just as fragile as anyone else. Her phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. She stared at it, tempted to toss the device into the surf, but something about the persistence of the ring made her answer. A woman's voice, steady and authoritative, came through the line. It was President Jennifer Reeves. Claire sat up straight, the salt spray suddenly feeling like a cold wake-up call. The president thanked her personally for the courage she had shown in exposing Secretary Webb, calling it an enormous service to the country. Claire thanked her, her voice trembling slightly, but the conversation wasn't over. The president explained that they were forming a commission to investigate the rot within the Department of Defense, to root out the systemic abuse that had allowed men like Webb to operate with impunity for decades. She wanted Claire to serve on it, citing her investigative skills and her father's legendary moral clarity. Claire closed her eyes, listening to the gulls scream overhead. She told the president with all due respect that she wasn't qualified. She wasn't a politician, a lawyer, or a formal investigator. She was just a daughter who wanted her father's killers to pay. The president countered that her lack of political baggage was exactly why she was the perfect candidate. Everyone else had a career to protect or a donor to appease, but Claire only cared about the truth. Claire tried to explain that she had already given 10 years of her life to this cause and that she needed to move on. She needed to build a life that wasn't defined by a tragedy. The president's tone shifted, becoming more somber. She told Claire that she understood, but she asked her to consider the reality of the situation. Her father had died trying to protect American soldiers from their own corrupt leadership. While Claire had exposed one man, the others were watching her. They were waiting to see if she would keep swinging or if she would retreat. Their choice would determine whether her father's sacrifice was a turning point in history or just a temporary delay of the inevitable. It was a heavy burden, and Claire told her it wasn't fair to put that on her shoulders. The president agreed it wasn't fair, but it was reality. The people who had ordered her father's death were still in power, tucked away in various offices and boardrooms, hoping she would go away quietly. The president left her with one final thought. Claire could either prove them right or prove them wrong. Then the line went dead. Claire sat in the silence of the beach, the weight of the phone in her hand feeling like a lead weight. She thought of Webb in his cell and the vast, invisible system that had shielded him for so long. She thought of the soldiers who were, at this very moment, being sent into harm's way based on intelligence that might be compromised or contracts that were signed in blood. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a video message. It was from Amanda Webb. When Claire opened the file, she saw Amanda sitting in what looked like a darkened office. Her eyes were rimmed with red, and her face was etched with a level of exhaustion that Claire recognized all too well. Amanda spoke directly to the camera, her voice thick with emotion. She told Claire that after her father's arrest, she had started looking into the defense contractors she had worked with. She had started asking questions and demanding a level of transparency that her father had always avoided. She told Claire that she had found evidence of 3 more operations that were identical to Black Tide. 3 more teams betrayed, 17 more soldiers murdered, and a trail of cover-ups that reached into the highest levels of government. Amanda admitted that she didn't have Claire's skills, her courage, or her father's moral authority. She was just the daughter of a corrupt man trying to balance the scales. She begged Claire to help her, saying that together they might actually be able to change the world. The video ended, leaving Claire in a world that felt significantly smaller and more dangerous than it had 10 minutes ago. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. She thought back to her 18th birthday. It had been a cold morning, and her father had taken her out to practice long-range shots in a biting wind. He had looked her in the eyes and told her that he would likely die doing this work, probably sooner rather than later. He told her that when it happened, she would want revenge. He told her to take it, to burn it all down. But he had also made her promise that she wouldn't stop there. He told her not to let his death be the end of the story, but the beginning of something bigger. He wanted his death to be the spark that consumed the corruption he couldn't reach. He had made her promise she wouldn't stop until the system that killed him was destroyed. At the time, Claire had made that vow through tears, not fully grasping the price she would eventually be asked to pay. Now, the bill was due. She stood up slowly, brushing the sand from her jeans. The desire for a quiet life in Montana was still there, a soft and tempting pull, but it was overshadowed by the ironclad promise she had made to a man who had given her everything. She walked back to her car and made a call. Logan answered on the first ring. Claire didn't waste time with apologies. She told him to gather everyone, Hayes, Torres, and any of the SEALs who had served with her father and actually wanted to fix the mess instead of just talking about it. Logan's voice was cautious as he asked her why. Claire told him that she wasn't done. Webb was just the opening act. There were dozens, maybe hundreds more like him, and she was going to find every single one of them. She was going to expose every conspiracy and destroy every corrupt official who thought they could murder soldiers and walk away clean. Logan's voice caught with a mix of relief and concern. He warned her that it would be dangerous, likely deadly. He reminded her that these people wouldn't let their empires be dismantled without a fight. Claire looked out at the horizon, at the spot where her father's body had returned to American soil in a flag-draped coffin. She told him that her father had spent 12 years turning her into a weapon for this exact purpose, and it was time she stopped wasting his effort. She realized that if she walked away now, she would be proving that her father's faith in her was misplaced, and she refused to let that be his legacy. When she asked when they could start, Logan told her they were ready whenever she was. She told him they would start the next morning with the 17 operations Amanda Webb had discovered. They would work backward, follow the money, and they wouldn't stop until the entire system was either rebuilt or burned to the ground. Logan told her that her father would be proud, but Claire offered a sad smile. She said her father would probably tell her she was being an idiot and that she should run while she still could. But then, she added, he would reload his weapon and stand right beside her, because that's what warriors did. They fought even when the odds were impossible, especially then. Claire drove back to the naval base at Coronado, the familiar gates feeling less like a cage and more like a fortress. When she walked back into the briefing room, the atmosphere was transformed. Logan, Hayes, Torres, and 6 other SEALs were waiting for her. They didn't stand at formal attention, but there was a palpable shift in their posture, a quiet show of respect for the woman who had chosen the hard path. Claire stood before them and kept it simple. She told them she was in all the way. Whatever it took, however long it lasted, they were going to make sure that the deaths of her father, Martinez, and every other soldier betrayed by their own leadership actually meant something. Hayes smiled for the first time in days, telling her it was about damn time. But Claire's expression remained grim. She warned them that this wouldn't be clean or easy. People would die, and it might very well be them. The system they were attacking had unlimited resources, political protection, and military backing. They were going to make enemies that would make a man like Webb look like a small-time amateur. She gave them one last chance to walk away, promising no judgment and no shame. Nobody moved. An hour later, Deputy Director Chen arrived, carrying a stack of 17 thick case files. These were the blueprinted legacies of betrayal, 17 operations like Black Tide, where teams were sent into the meat grinder for reasons that had nothing to do with national security. They spread the files across the long tables in the briefing room, the harsh fluorescent lights illuminating names, dates, and coordinates that had been scrubbed from official history. Chen noted that this could take years, maybe even decades, because the corruption was so deeply entrenched. Claire looked at the mountain of paper and replied that they had the time. Her father had spent his life fighting for something bigger than himself, and she was prepared to do the same. Torres looked up from a file and asked her about her own life, her future. He pointed out that she was only 32. She could still have a family, a career, and a normal kind of happiness. He asked if she really wanted to spend the rest of her days hunting shadows. Claire looked down at her father's journal, which sat on the table. She traced the cramped, familiar handwriting of his last entry. She told Torres that her father had given her 2 gifts. The first was the skill set. He had taught her to shoot, to fight, and to investigate until she was a threat to the most dangerous people on Earth. The second gift was purpose. He had shown her that things like truth and honor mattered more than personal comfort. She admitted she could try to build a normal life, but it would be built on a foundation of the soldiers who were still dying because she hadn't finished the job. She told him she couldn't live with that. Logan nodded slowly, the weight of the mission settling over the group. He remarked that they were essentially taking on the entire military-industrial complex. Claire confirmed it. Logan pointed out that when her father tried to do that, it got him killed. Claire looked around the room at the men who had become her brothers in arms. She told him that her father had tried to do it alone. They weren't alone. They had evidence, they had public attention, and most importantly, they had an advantage her father never got. They had the initiative. Her father was always working against a clock, trying to expose the truth before they could silence him. But they had already survived the first attempt to kill them. Now they were the hunters. Hayes pulled one of the files from the stack, labeled Operation Desert Smoke 2018. It detailed an 8-man SEAL team sent to recover intelligence from a terrorist cell in Iraq. All 8 had been killed. The official report cited an ambush, but Chen pointed out that the medical examiner's notes, hidden in a secondary file, indicated inconsistencies. The wounds were from American ammunition, fired at close range. The room went silent as the implications settled in. It was the same pattern as Black Tide. Torres whispered a question, asking how many more there were. Chen replied that she had been tracking this for 5 years and believed there were at least 50 similar operations. That meant hundreds of dead soldiers and hundreds of families living a lie. They worked through the night, the air in the room growing thick with the smell of coffee and the quiet intensity of men and women planning a war. They built a roadmap, not for the next few weeks, but for the years to come. By the time the first rays of dawn began to bleed through the windows, they had a strategy to dismantle the network piece by piece. As the sun rose over Coronado, Claire stood at the window, watching the orange light reflect off the water. She thought about her father watching this same sunrise decades ago, preparing for missions he knew might be his last. She received a call from Amanda Webb, who asked if she had seen the message. Claire told her she was in and that they were going after everyone. Amanda thanked her, acknowledging the sacrifice Claire was making, but Claire corrected her. She wasn't sacrificing anything. She was investing in a future where honor actually meant something. She told Amanda to meet them in San Diego the next day with every scrap of data she had on defense contractors and black-budget programs. When she hung up, Claire felt a sensation she hadn't experienced in 10 years. Hope. It wasn't the desperate, frantic hope of finding her father's killer, but a steady, burning hope that his death might actually change the world. Logan approached her, asking if she truly believed they could win against such overwhelming odds. Claire shared a memory of a time she and her father were tracking a wounded bear through a blizzard. She had asked him if they would survive, and he had told her that winning wasn't about survival. It was about commitment. He had told her that if you commit fully to the fight, you let the consequences sort themselves out. They might die, but they would die fighting for something real, and perhaps that fight would inspire the next person to keep going until the truth finally won. Hayes joined them, reporting that the Pentagon was already opening investigations into 23 more operations based on the evidence they had already leaked. Congressional hearings were being scheduled, and the media was beginning to tear into the story with a hunger that couldn't be ignored. Claire felt the weight of her father's journal in her pocket and told them to let it spread. She wanted every corrupt official who thought they were untouchable to realize the walls were closing in. 3 months later, Claire stood once again in the hallowed silence of Arlington National Cemetery. This time, however, she wasn't alone in her grief. Behind her stood the families of the 17 soldiers killed in the operations they had already exposed. Martinez's widow stood there, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. Amanda Webb stood in the shadows of the trees, watching from a distance. Logan, Hayes, Torres, and dozens of other SEALs in full dress uniforms formed a silent honor guard. They were there to dedicate a new memorial, not to a single man, but to all the warriors who had been betrayed by the system they swore to protect. Claire stepped up to the podium, her voice steady as it carried across the rows of white headstones. She spoke of her father, how he had been murdered by people who thought they could bury the truth. She told the crowd that those people were wrong, because his death wasn't an end, but a beginning. It was the start of a reckoning that would continue until every corrupt official faced justice and every family got the truth they deserved. She declared that the memorial wasn't about the past, but about a future where courage was rewarded and soldiers could trust their leaders. She finished by saying that her father died believing that future was possible, and they were going to prove him right. The applause that followed wasn't the polite, measured clapping of a formal ceremony. It was a roar of raw emotion and gratitude. As the crowd began to disperse, Claire walked over to her father's grave. She stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at her hair. She whispered to the headstone that she had kept her promise. She had finished what he started, and she wasn't going to stop until there was nothing left to fight. She told him that he had raised a warrior, and it was time she started acting like one. She turned and walked away from the grave, her stride purposeful and strong. Logan fell in beside her, asking what the next move was. Claire didn't hesitate. She told him they were moving on to Operation Desert Smoke. They were going to find out who ordered the deaths of those 8 SEALs and ensure they faced the same justice as Webb. And after that, they would move on to the next, and the next, until the system was clean or they were dead. Logan remarked that her father would be proud, but Claire just looked ahead. She knew her father would call her crazy, then he'd grab his gear and follow her into the fire. They walked out of the cemetery gates together, a daughter carrying a torch, surrounded by a team built on honor rather than orders. Behind them, the sun set over the endless rows of white markers, the silent witnesses to a legacy that was finally being honored. Clare Donovan had started her journey looking for a single answer, but she had ended it by starting a war for the soul of the country. And as she looked toward the future, she knew that the war was just beginning.